Hey everyone, tonight we delve into one of the most haunting and tragic tales from the Star Wars galaxy. The story of Meetra Surik, the Jedi Exile, whose choices at the end of the Mandalorian Wars would echo through the Force itself, creating wounds that threatened to devour all life. This is the chronicle of a general who saved the Republic by becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, something that should never have existed. So before we begin this dark journey together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into Star Wars lore. I noticed that about 79% of you watching are not subscribed yet, and hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow and lets me bring you more of these epic tales. If you're hungry for even more Star Wars lore and want to explore other corners of this vast galaxy, definitely check out my friend's channel Lore Reverse. I've added the link in the description below. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something magical about knowing we're all connected across different time zones, sharing these stories together under the same stars. Now get comfortable, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background sound. Wrap yourself in your blanket and let's journey into the shadows of the old Republic together. In the dying light of distant suns, where the screams of a billion souls once echoed through the cosmic void, there lies a world that should not exist. Malachor V, they called it, though names hold little meaning for places that have become wounds in reality itself. Here, in a moment that lasted mere heartbeats, but changed the galaxy forever, a single choice was made that would haunt the Force for generations to come. The woman who made that choice stands now in the sterile corridors of a mining facility, awakening from Kolto-induced dreams filled with the memories of what she commanded to happen. Her name is Meetra Surik, though she has forgotten even that simple truth about herself. The galaxy knows her only as the Exile, the Jedi who walked away from everything she once believed sacred, carrying within her soul something that defies understanding. But this story begins not with her awakening, but with the moment she chose to become something unprecedented in the annals of galactic history. Picture, if you will, the final battle above a world where the dark side of the Force had taken root so deeply that the very stones whispered with malevolent hunger. The Republic fleet hung in space like dying stars, their hulls scarred by months of brutal warfare against the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. Below them, on Malachor's surface, Jedi and Sith artifacts lay buried beneath layers of ancient stone, waiting. The planet itself was a trap, a place where the boundary between life and death grew thin, where the Force itself seemed to hunger for destruction. The Mandalorians had chosen this world for their final stand, not knowing they were dancing to the tune of a far more ancient evil. In the command center of the Republic flagship, a woman stood before a decision that no sentient being should ever have to make. Around her, holographic displays showed the carnage below. Republic soldiers dying by the thousands, their screams reaching through the Force to touch every Jedi present. The war had already claimed so much, twisted so many of her fellow Jedi down dark paths in their desperation to achieve victory. Meetra Surik looked upon the tactical display showing a device her own engineer had constructed, a weapon of such terrible power that its very existence violated every principle the Jedi had ever stood for. The mass shadow generator, they called it, though its true purpose went far beyond simple destruction. This machine would not merely destroy a world, it would wound the Force itself, create a silence where once there had been the eternal song of life. The choice before her was simple in its horror: activate the weapon and save the Republic by committing an act of genocide so complete that it would echo through the Force for millennia, or watch as the darkness spreading from Malachor consumed first the Republic fleet, then the galaxy beyond. In that moment, surrounded by the dying thoughts of countless soldiers, she reached out through the Force and felt something that no Jedi before her had ever experienced. She felt the hunger, the terrible, gnawing need that lived at the heart of Malachor V, the same hunger that had corrupted Sith lords for centuries, and in recognizing it, She understood what she would have to become to wield the weapon effectively. Not just a destroyer of worlds, but something that could feed upon the death she was about to unleash. When the mass shadow generator activated, reality itself screamed. The Force, that eternal river of life that connected all things, suddenly developed a hole, not an absence, but an actual wound that hurt to perceive, a place where the natural order had been deliberately violated. And standing at the center of that violation, drinking in the death of millions through abilities no Jedi should possess, was Meetra Surik. But here is where our tale truly begins to unfold. In the aftermath of that terrible victory, when the woman who had saved the galaxy found herself called before the Jedi Council to answer for what she had become, they looked upon her with horror and pity, these masters who had once been her teachers, for they could sense the change in her. Where once the Force had flowed through her like a river, now there was only silence. Where once there had been connection, now there was a void that seemed to pull at the very life around it. What they could not know, what she herself did not yet understand, was that this silence was not loss but transformation. The wound she carried was not just within her, but spreading outward, touching other Force sensitives across the galaxy in ways that would only become clear years later. The Exile was not just disconnected from the Force, she was becoming something that could consume it entirely. And so our story begins 10 years after Malachor V, in the cold corridors of Peragus Mining Station, where the Exile awakens to find that her past has finally caught up with her. 10 years have passed since the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars, and the galaxy bears the scars of that conflict like wounds that refuse to heal. The old Republic stands victorious but hollow, its Senate chambers filled with politicians who speak of peace while the outer rim burns with the aftermath of war. Pirates prey upon shipping lanes once protected by Jedi Knights who now lie buried beneath the rubble of distant worlds. The Force itself seems diminished, as if something vital has been torn from its very fabric. In the depths of space, far from the gleaming towers of Coruscant and the endless debates of the Galactic Senate, drifts a mining facility that has become a tomb. Peragus Station orbits a world rich in fuel, but poor in hope, its corridors echoing with the mechanical sounds of automated systems continuing their work long after their operators have vanished. The air tastes of recycled atmosphere and industrial chemicals, while the constant hum of mining equipment provides a metallic lullaby that speaks of isolation and abandonment. It is here, in a medical bay where kolto tanks bubble with healing fluid, that consciousness slowly returns to a woman who has spent 5 years trying to forget who she once was. The liquid that has sustained her body cannot heal the deeper wounds she carries, the ones that cut through her connection to the Force itself. As awareness creeps back into her mind, she becomes conscious first of the silence, not the mechanical quiet of the station, but the profound absence where once the songs of distant stars had whispered through her thoughts. Meetra Surik, though she has not spoken that name aloud in years, opens eyes that have seen the death of worlds. The medical bay around her is sterile, functional, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Emergency lighting casts harsh shadows across walls lined with monitoring equipment, while the soft bubbling of kolto tanks provides the only organic sound in this mechanical womb. She tries to remember how she came to be here, but her memories are fragmented, broken like pieces of a shattered holocron scattered across the years. Her body moves with the careful deliberation of someone who has forgotten how to trust her own reflexes. The Force, that constant companion that once guided her every action, remains silent. In its place is something else, something that feels like hunger wearing the mask of emptiness. When she reaches out with senses that once could touch the minds of allies across star systems, she encounters only void, not the peaceful quiet of meditation, but an aching absence that seems to pull at the life around it. The Koltor fluid drains away as automated systems detect her awakening, leaving her standing naked and vulnerable in the harsh light of the medical bay. Her reflection in the darkened viewports shows a woman marked by more than just the passage of time. Scars trace patterns across skin that was once unmarked, while her eyes hold a depth that speaks of things witnessed that should never have been seen. There is something unsettling about her presence, a quality that makes the very air seem to bend away from her, as if in recognition of something unnatural. Clothing waits for her in a nearby locker, simple garments that speak of function over comfort. As she dresses, fragments of memory begin to surface, like debris from a ship broken apart in hyperspace. The sound of her own voice giving orders that would damn millions, the weight of a lightsaber that no longer calls to her hand, the faces of Jedi Masters who looked upon her with a mixture of horror and pity before casting her out from everything she had ever known. The corridors of Peragus Station stretch before her like arteries in a mechanical body that has forgotten how to pump life through its systems. Her footsteps echo in the emptiness, each sound seeming to emphasize her isolation. The mining facility was never meant to be beautiful, but there is something profoundly lonely about its empty passages, as if the absence of crew has left behind more than just vacant space. The very walls seem to whisper of abandonment, of people who simply vanished without explanation. In the pilot's quarters, she discovers she is not entirely alone. A man sits hunched over a deckrick board, his fingers moving pieces in patterns that suggest a game played more from habit than enjoyment. His appearance speaks of someone who has seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners, his clothes worn but clean, his posture suggesting someone constantly ready for violence while hoping to avoid it. When he looks up at her approach, his eyes hold a wariness that goes beyond simple caution. This is a Tonrand, though she does not yet know his name or the shadows that drive him. There is something familiar about the way he holds himself, the careful distance he maintains from direct eye contact, the subtle flinch when her attention falls upon him. He is a man carrying secrets, but then, in the aftermath of the Mandalorian Wars, who is not? His voice, when he speaks, carries the accent of the core worlds, but roughened by years in less civilized space. The conversation between them dances around truths neither is ready to acknowledge. He tells her of how he found her floating in an escape pod, her ship destroyed by unknown attackers, her body barely alive, and her mind locked in healing sleep. She listens to his words but pays more attention to what he does not say, the careful gaps in his narrative that speak of a man who has learned to edit his own history for survival. Behind them both, observing from the shadows with the patience of someone who has watched empires rise and fall, stands another figure. An elderly woman whose presence seems to bend reality around her like gravity distorting space. Her clothes are simple, almost humble, but there is nothing humble about the intelligence that burns behind her eyes. This is Kryria, though she offers no name, and he provides no introduction. When Kryria speaks, her voice carries the weight of years and the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. As she watches the exile with an attention that goes beyond mere curiosity, studying her the way a scientist might observe a unique specimen, there is something predatory about her interest, but also something almost maternal, as if she sees in this broken Jedi a project worthy of her considerable talents. The three of them form an unlikely triangle in the empty corridors of Peragus Station. The exile, cut off from the force that once defined her existence, struggling to understand what she has become. A Ton, carrying guilt and secrets that color every word he speaks, trying to maintain distance from people who might see too deeply into his past. And Kryria, ancient and patient, and utterly certain of her own purposes, watching them both with the satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans are finally beginning to unfold. The mining facility around them continues its automated operations, drilling through planetary crust in search of fuel, while its human operators remain conspicuously absent, The rhythmic pounding of extraction equipment provides a mechanical heartbeat that emphasizes the emptiness rather than filling it. In the deeper levels, mining droids continue their programmed tasks, unaware that their masters have vanished, creating a symphony of industrial sounds that speaks of purpose without consciousness. As the Exile explores her temporary prison, she begins to understand that Peragus Station is more than just a mining facility. It is a place where the normal rules seem suspended, where the Force itself feels muted and strange. The asteroid it orbits pulses with unusual energy signatures, while the facility's deeper levels hide secrets that its missing crew died to protect. This is not a place of refuge but a trap, though whether it was set for her specifically or simply sprung by her presence remains unclear. The hunger that has replaced her connection to the Force seems to respond to this environment, growing stronger in the presence of the strange energies that permeate the asteroid. She can feel something calling to her from the depths of space, a presence that recognizes what she has become and approves. It is not the warm guidance of the Force she once knew, but something colder, more predatory, that promises power at a price she is only beginning to understand. In the medical bay where she awakened, monitoring equipment continues to record data about her condition, but the readings make no sense according to conventional understanding of Force-sensitive individuals. Where there should be midi-chlorian activity, there is only silence. Where there should be connection to the cosmic energy that binds the galaxy together, there is instead something that reads like a wound in reality itself. The dreams come first, creeping into Meetra's consciousness like poison seeping through stone. They are not the gentle visions that once guided Jedi in their meditations, but something far more visceral and demanding. In these nocturnal visitations, she finds herself standing once again on the bridge of her flagship, watching tactical displays that show a world dying in slow motion. The screams that echo through her sleeping mind are not imagined but remembered, the actual death cries of millions filtered through Force abilities she should never have possessed. Each morning brings the same ritual of awakening to silence where music should be. The Force, that eternal symphony that once connected her to every living thing in the galaxy, remains stubbornly absent. In its place grows something that feels less like healing and more like infection. She can sense Aton's unease when he thinks she is not watching, the way his hand drifts toward weapons that are never quite within reach. There is recognition in his wariness, as if he knows exactly what kind of predator she has become. Chrysia observes these interactions with the patience of someone who has orchestrated far grander schemes than this small drama aboard a mining station. Her questions seem casual, almost conversational, but they probe with surgical precision toward truths that Meetra has spent years trying to bury. The old woman speaks of the Mandalorian Wars as if she witnessed them personally, her knowledge too detailed and too intimate for someone who should have been safely ensconced in some Jedi archive during those bloody years. The first concrete sign that her past refuses to stay buried arrives in the form of a damaged recording device discovered in the deeper levels of Peragus Station. The holographic message that flickers to life shows a face she recognizes, though age and suffering have carved deep lines where once there had been the unmarked features of youth. Baldur, her former engineer, the brilliant Zabrak who created the weapon that ended the war, and perhaps her soul along with it. His recorded words carry the weight of shared guilt, speaking of dreams that will not cease, and memories that burn brighter with each passing year. He speaks of others who served under her command during those final campaigns, Jedi who have scattered to the far corners of the galaxy, carrying wounds that will not heal. Some have fallen to the dark side entirely, while others have simply disappeared into the vast anonymity of the Outer Rim. All bear the mark of what they witnessed and participated in above Malachor V. The message contains more than just nostalgic regret. Baldur speaks of disturbances in the Force that have been growing stronger over the years, concentrated around certain individuals who were present during the final battle. He mentions names she recognizes, fellow commanders who made similar choices to hers in those desperate final days of the war. Some have become hermits, others have sought out ancient Sith knowledge in their attempts to understand what they have become. A few have simply vanished, leaving behind only whispers of madness and violence. Most disturbing of all are his references to what he calls echoes, Force-sensitive individuals who have begun manifesting abilities that mirror those developed by veterans of Malachor V, young Jedi, who have never seen combat, suddenly finding themselves able to drain life from their surroundings. Padawans developing an inexplicable hunger for the suffering of others. The wound that was created above that cursed world is spreading, infecting the Force itself with patterns of behavior that should not exist. As she processes this information, Meetra becomes aware that her own condition is worsening. The hunger that replaced her connection to the Force grows stronger each day, fed by the proximity to others. She can feel Aton's life force like warmth radiating from a fire, and part of her that she barely recognizes wants to reach out and take it for herself. The realization horrifies her, but the horror itself feels distant, muted by the same disconnection that has severed her ties to everything she once held sacred. Chrysia watches these internal struggles with evident satisfaction, offering observations that are simultaneously helpful and deeply unsettling. She speaks of the nature of strength and sacrifice, of the prices that must be paid for victory in a galaxy that does not reward the merciful. Her words carry the authority of someone who has studied darkness not as an enemy, but as a teacher, learning its lessons and applying them with ruthless efficiency. The old woman's knowledge extends far beyond what any Jedi archive should contain. She speaks casually of Sith techniques that were supposedly lost millennia ago, of methods for manipulating the Force that were forbidden even during the height of the Great Hyperspace War. When pressed about the source of her learning, she offers only cryptic smiles and references to teachers who understood that true wisdom comes only through embracing what others fear to examine. It is during one of these conversations that Chrysia reveals the true purpose behind their presence on Peragus Station. They are not here by accident, or even by the random chance that brought the Exile's escape pod to this particular facility. The mining operation itself was a cover for something far more significant, a research project aimed at understanding and potentially replicating the conditions that created the mass shadow generator's unique effects. The asteroid that Peragus Station orbits is not randomly chosen real estate, but a carefully selected site where the boundary between normal space and hyperspace grows thin. The mining equipment that continues its automated operations is not extracting fuel, but something far more valuable, a substance that resonates with the same energies that were unleashed above Malachor V. The missing crew did not simply vanish, but were consumed by experiments that went catastrophically wrong, their life force absorbed by the same processes they were trying to understand. This revelation brings with it a terrible understanding of her own situation. The escape pod that brought her here was not fleeing random attackers, but specific enemies who know exactly what she has become. Forces are moving throughout the galaxy that recognize the threat she represents, not to any particular faction or government, but to the very concept of life as it has existed for millions of years. The wound she carries is not a personal affliction, but a weapon of cosmic proportions, one that certain individuals would very much like to study, control, or eliminate entirely. The call to adventure that reaches her is not the noble summons that once drew Jedi to defend the innocent and uphold justice. Instead, it is the inexorable pull of consequences demanding to be faced, of choices made in desperation that continue to echo through the years with increasing violence. She can remain hidden in the outer rim, allowing the infection she carries to spread unchecked through the Force, or she can confront the truth of what she has become and attempt to understand whether redemption is even theoretically possible. Aton's reluctance to involve himself in galactic events becomes more understandable as she learns more about his background. He is not simply a smuggler or scoundrel, but someone who has direct experience with the aftermath of the Mandalorian Wars. His knowledge of Jedi capabilities is too intimate for someone who claims to have always operated on the fringes of galactic society. There are gaps in his personal history that align suspiciously with certain classified Republic operations, suggesting a past that involves the systematic hunting of Force-sensitive individuals. Chrysia's manipulation becomes more obvious as the pieces fall into place, but her agenda remains maddeningly opaque. She clearly wants Meetra to embark on some kind of journey, to confront figures from her past and uncover truths that have been deliberately hidden. Yet her motivations seem to extend far beyond simple revenge or even justice. She speaks of larger patterns at work throughout galactic history, of cycles that must be broken and lessons that must be learned regardless of the cost to individuals or civilizations. The decision to leave Peragus Station and venture into the wider galaxy is not made through noble inspiration, but through the recognition that remaining static will only allow the situation to deteriorate further. The wound she carries is not healing with time, but metastasizing, spreading its influence to others and potentially threatening the continued existence of the Force itself. Whatever she has become, she is the only one with sufficient understanding of the original trauma to potentially find a solution. As they prepare to depart the mining facility, Meetra takes one final look at the place where her journey of understanding began. The mechanical sounds that have provided constant background noise during her stay continue unchanged, but now they seem less like the heartbeat of a functioning facility, and more like the death rattle of something that should have been allowed to die years ago. The path ahead leads not toward redemption, but toward a reckoning that has been postponed far too long. The departure from Peragus Station unfolds with a violence that seems almost inevitable in retrospect. What begins as a routine evacuation transforms into a nightmare of explosions and collapsing corridors as the facility's automated systems turn hostile under the influence of a Sith assassin who has been hunting the Exile across the galaxy. The mining station that served as temporary refuge becomes a death trap, its corridors filling with poisonous gases and its structural supports failing under the weight of deliberate sabotage. Darth Sion arrives like a walking corpse, animated by hatred too pure to allow death its natural dominion. His body bears the marks of countless battles, scarred flesh held together by sheer force of will and an understanding of pain that transcends normal biological limitations. When he speaks, his voice carries the grinding quality of someone who has died many times but refuses to accept the finality of that experience. His presence aboard the station triggers catastrophic failures throughout its systems, as if reality itself rejects the impossibility of his continued existence. The confrontation between the Exile and this undying Sith Lord illuminates the true nature of what she has become during her years of isolation. Where once she might have drawn upon the Force to enhance her physical abilities and anticipate her opponent's moves, now she finds herself operating through different principles entirely. The hunger that has replaced her connection to the cosmic energy allows her to perceive weaknesses that have nothing to do with conventional combat techniques. Saurian's immortality, achieved through embracing agony as a source of power, creates a resonance with the wound she carries that neither of them fully understands. Each blow exchanged between them seems to tear at the fabric of local reality, causing structural damage to the station that goes far beyond simple physical impact. The mining facility begins to tear itself apart under the influence of their conflict, automated systems failing as the energies released by their battle interfere with basic electronic functions. The escape from Peragus requires sacrificing the facility entirely, triggering an explosion that consumes not just the station, but the asteroid it orbited, and much of the surrounding debris field, as their stolen vessel clears the expanding fireball. Meetra experiences a moment of profound recognition. This is the second world she has caused to die, the second place where her choices have resulted in the complete destruction of everything capable of supporting life. The pattern emerging from these events suggests that destruction follows in her wake not as an accident, but as an inevitable consequence of her very existence. Aton's piloting skills prove exceptional during their escape, guiding their ship through debris fields and hyperspace calculations that would challenge far more experienced navigators. His familiarity with evasive maneuvers speaks of someone who has spent considerable time fleeing from enemies with superior firepower and resources. The casual way he discusses alternate routes and safe houses throughout the Outer Rim suggests a network of contacts that extends far beyond what any simple smuggler would require for legitimate business operations. Their destination is Telos, a world that bears its own scars from the Mandalorian Wars, but has attempted to heal them through an ambitious ecological restoration project. The planet's surface, once reduced to barren rock by orbital bombardment, now shows patches of green where carefully cultivated forests have taken root in artificially enriched soil. The restoration effort represents one of the few positive legacies of the war's aftermath, a demonstration that destruction need not be permanent if sufficient resources and determination are applied to the healing process. Yet even this symbol of recovery carries darker undertones that become apparent as their ship approaches Peragus Station, the massive orbital platform that coordinates the planet's restoration efforts. The station itself is a marvel of engineering, its rotating sections generating artificial gravity, while its exterior bristles with defensive installations that speak of lessons learned during the recent conflicts. The traffic patterns around the station reveal a level of militarization that seems excessive for a purely civilian restoration project. Kreia observes their approach to Telos with evident satisfaction, though her comments suggest that the planet's significance extends far beyond its role as a symbol of post-war recovery. She speaks of the world's connection to certain individuals from the Exile's past, former allies, who have sought refuge in its restoration projects while struggling with their own memories of what they participated in during the war's final campaigns. The suggestion that this journey has been carefully orchestrated to facilitate specific encounters becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The bureaucratic processes required to gain legitimate access to Peragus Station provide an opportunity for Meetra to observe how the galaxy has changed during her years of absence. The security screenings and background checks reveal a republic grown paranoid and suspicious, where individual freedoms have been sacrificed in the name of preventing future conflicts. The casual acceptance of surveillance and control measures by ordinary citizens suggests that the victory over the Mandalorians has come at the cost of many of the principles that victory was supposed to protect. Bardur awaits them on Peragus Station, though the years have not been kind to the Zabrak engineer who created the weapon that ended the war. His mechanical arm, a replacement for limb lost during one of their earlier campaigns, has been upgraded with additional tools and sensors that speak of someone who has thrown himself into technical projects as a means of avoiding more painful memories. When he greets his former commander, there is joy mixed with something approaching terror, as if he recognizes that her arrival signals the end of whatever peace he has managed to construct for himself. Their reunion takes place in one of the station's observation lounges, where massive transparent steel windows provide a clear view of Telos's recovering surface. As they speak, Meetra becomes aware that the restoration project below represents more than just environmental recovery. The patterns of new growth, the placement of monitoring stations, the carefully controlled introduction of species selected for their specific characteristics all suggest a level of manipulation that goes far beyond simple ecological restoration. Bardur's guilt over his role in creating the mass shadow generator has not diminished with time, but has instead crystallized into a form of obsession with understanding the weapon's true effects. His work on Telos has provided cover for research into the nature of the force wounds created above Malachor V, studies that have revealed disturbing patterns in how those energies continue to influence the surrounding space. The restoration project itself has been designed partially as an experiment in whether life can take root in areas touched by such profound violations of natural law. The engineer's reports describe anomalies in the restored ecosystems that should not exist according to any known biological principles. Plants that seem to feed on something other than sunlight and nutrients from the soil. Animals that display behavioral patterns suggesting an awareness of things that exist beyond normal sensory perception. Most disturbing of all, sensitive individuals who spend extended time on the planet's surface begin to develop abilities that mirror those manifested by veterans of the Malachor V campaign. As night falls over Telos Station, Meetra finds herself standing before those same observation windows, watching the lights of restoration facilities scattered across the planet's surface. Each point of illumination represents thousands of people working to bring life back to a world that was murdered during the war. Yet she cannot escape the feeling that their efforts are somehow tainted by the same darkness that she carries within herself. The very act of witnessing their hope seems to drain something vital from the endeavor, as if her presence corrupts the purity of their intentions. The journey that began with her awakening on Peragus Station has brought her face to face with the reality that isolation is not possible for someone who carries the kind of wound she bears. Every place she visits, every person she encounters, becomes touched by the same emptiness that has consumed her connection to the Force. The path ahead leads not toward healing but toward a deeper understanding of just how far the infection has already spread. The archives buried beneath Telos Station hold secrets that were never meant to be preserved, classified records from the final years of the Mandalorian Wars that paint a very different picture of the conflict than the sanitized histories available to the general public. Bao Dur's security clearance, maintained through his work on the restoration project, grants access to files that document not just the strategic decisions made during those desperate campaigns, but the psychological toll extracted from those who implemented them. Among these digital ghosts, Meetra discovers recordings of her own debriefings with Republic intelligence, sessions that took place in the weeks following major battles where her tactical innovations had achieved victory at costs that defied easy calculation. Her younger self speaks with the clinical detachment of someone who has learned to compartmentalize horror as a survival mechanism, describing the systematic use of captured Sith techniques to enhance the effectiveness of Republic forces. The recordings reveal a progression that she had not recognized at the time, a gradual transformation from idealistic Jedi Knight into something far more pragmatic and infinitely more dangerous. Each successful campaign had required slightly more compromise, slightly more willingness to employ methods that violated traditional Jedi principles. The justifications had seemed reasonable at the time, necessary adaptations to an enemy that showed no regard for conventional rules of warfare. Most disturbing are the psychological evaluations conducted by Republic medics who clearly had no understanding of what they were documenting. Her responses to standard mental health assessments show a pattern of disconnection that predates the final battle above Malachor V by several months. The wound in her connection to the Force had not been created by the mass shadow generator, but had been growing gradually as she learned to survive by feeding on the death and suffering that surrounded every battlefield. Crankia studies these revelations with the satisfaction of a teacher whose most challenging student has finally grasped a fundamental concept. Her comments about the nature of strength and the price of victory take on new meaning when viewed against the evidence of how systematically the war had corrupted everyone involved in its prosecution. She speaks of the futility of attempting to fight darkness while remaining untouched by it, of the inevitable transformation that occurs when idealists encounter the practical necessities of survival. The technical specifications for the mass shadow generator, stored in encrypted files that Bao accesses with obvious reluctance, reveal a device far more sophisticated than the simple gravity weapon described in official reports. The engineering diagrams show components designed specifically to interact with force-sensitive materials, resonance chambers calibrated to amplify the psychic energies released during mass death events, focusing arrays that could direct and channel the resulting force disturbances with unprecedented precision. Reading through the weapon's design documents, Meetra begins to understand that the mass shadow generator was never intended simply to destroy Malachor V. The device had been engineered to create a specific type of wound in the Force, one that would serve as both a trap for Sith entities drawn to the planet's dark side energies and a laboratory for studying the effects of controlled Force trauma on a galactic scale. The Republic's most classified research into Sith techniques had culminated in a weapon that functioned according to principles borrowed directly from their enemies. The realization brings with it a wave of nausea that has nothing to do with physical illness. Every choice she had made during the war's final campaigns, every innovation that had seemed like inspired tactical thinking, had actually been the result of careful manipulation by forces that understood her psychology far better than she understood it herself. The gradual corruption of her connection to the Force had not been an unfortunate side effect of necessary decisions, but the intended outcome of a plan that spanned decades. Bao Da's own guilt takes on new dimensions as these revelations emerge. His creation of the mass shadow generator had not been the result of individual genius applied to an impossible problem, but the culmination of research programs that had been feeding him information and resources since the early days of the conflict. The weapons specifications had been provided by sources that claimed to represent advanced Republic research divisions, but whose true affiliations remained deliberately obscured. The engineer's attempts to understand and possibly reverse the weapon's effects have led him deep into studies of Force theory that border on forbidden Sith knowledge. His research notes describe experiments with artificial Force wounds, attempts to recreate on a smaller scale the conditions that existed above Malachor V. The results have been uniformly disturbing, creating localized areas where the normal rules governing life and death no longer apply in predictable ways. Most alarming are his observations about the spread of Force wounds throughout the galaxy, a phenomenon that appears to be accelerating rather than diminishing with time. Individuals with no direct connection to the Mandalorian Wars have begun manifesting symptoms similar to those displayed by veterans of that conflict. Young Force sensitives are developing abilities that should not exist according to traditional Jedi understanding, while established practitioners find their connection to the Force becoming increasingly unstable and unpredictable. The pattern suggests that the wound created above Malachor V was not a single traumatic event, but the beginning of a process that continues to unfold across the galaxy. The Force itself appears to be undergoing a fundamental change, developing characteristics that more closely resemble the hunger and emptiness that the Exile carries within herself. The implications of this transformation extend far beyond the personal trauma of individual victims to threaten the very nature of life as it has existed for millions of years. As they delve deeper into the classified archives, evidence emerges of other incidents similar to Malachor V, smaller-scale events where Republic forces employed techniques that created localized Force disturbances. The systematic nature of these experiments suggests a coordinated research program aimed at understanding and weaponizing the principles underlying Sith power. The Mandalorian Wars had provided cover for studies that would have been impossible to conduct during peacetime, with entire star systems serving as testing grounds for theoretical applications of Force manipulation. The discovery of these files triggers automated security protocols that alert station authorities to unauthorized access of classified materials. The response team that arrives to investigate includes individuals whose Force sensitivity becomes immediately apparent to Meetra despite her own disconnected state. These are not ordinary security personnel, but specially trained operatives whose abilities have been specifically designed to detect and contain Force-related threats. The confrontation that follows reveals another layer of the conspiracy that has shaped recent galactic history. Jedi Station itself serves multiple purposes beyond its publicly acknowledged role in planetary restoration. The facility functions as a monitoring post for tracking Force anomalies throughout the galaxy, with its civilian population providing cover for research activities that extend the work begun during the Mandalorian Wars. The restoration project on the planet's surface is partially an experiment in whether normal life can coexist with areas touched by Force wounds. Kraya's response to these revelations demonstrates a level of foreknowledge that makes her complicity in the larger conspiracy undeniable. Her manipulation of events to bring the exile to this specific location at this particular time was not opportunistic, but carefully planned to coincide with the discovery of these particular files. The old woman's agenda clearly extends far beyond simple revenge or even justice to encompass goals that require a fundamental transformation of how the Force operates throughout the galaxy. The escape from Telos Station requires sacrificing any pretense of maintaining a low profile, as their theft of classified information triggers security responses that involve multiple star destroyers and specially equipped pursuit craft. The chase through the system's outer planets provides ample demonstration that the Republic's military capabilities have been significantly enhanced through the application of techniques learned during their study of Force wounds. The pursuing vessels display coordination and tactical awareness that suggests their crews have been augmented through methods that blur the line between technology and Force manipulation. As their stolen ship clears the Telos system and jumps to hyperspace, Meetra contemplates the implications of what they have learned. The wound she carries is not a personal affliction, but a symptom of a galactic infection that threatens to transform the very nature of existence. The journey ahead will require confronting not just her own past, but the entire structure of lies and manipulation that has shaped recent history. The true enemy is not any individual or faction, but the corruption of the Force itself, a process that may already have progressed beyond the point where reversal is possible. The coordinates their ship follows lead toward worlds where other pieces of this vast puzzle await discovery. Places where the survivors of Malachor V have sought refuge, and where the spreading infection has begun to manifest in ways that defy all previous understanding of how the Force operates. Each destination promises new horrors and deeper understanding of what they are truly fighting against. The journey to Dantooine unfolds under the weight of manufactured certainty, as if the universe itself has conspired to provide neat explanations for events that defy rational understanding. The pastoral beauty of the agricultural world offers a stark contrast to the industrial horrors they have left behind, its rolling grasslands and crystal formations, speaking of peace that feels almost aggressive in its insistence on normalcy. Here, among the ruins of the old Jedi enclave, the first pieces of a seemingly coherent narrative begin to fall into place. Master Vrook Lamar awaits them in the rebuilt council chambers, his presence radiating the kind of rigid certainty that has sustained him through decades of galactic upheaval. Age has not softened his conviction that the galaxy operates according to principles that can be understood and controlled through proper application of Jedi doctrine. When he speaks of the exile's past, his words carry the authority of someone who believes absolutely in his own interpretation of events, regardless of how poorly that interpretation might align with observable reality. According to Vrook's carefully constructed version of history, Meetra Surik was a war hero whose sacrifice saved the Republic from total destruction. The mass shadow generator, in this telling, was a weapon of last resort deployed against an enemy that threatened to consume the galaxy itself. The trauma that severed her connection to the Force was not corruption but purification, the natural result of a pure soul recoiling from the necessity of mass destruction. Her exile from the Jedi Order had been motivated not by fear of what she had become, but by recognition that such purity could not coexist with an organization that had been tainted by its participation in warfare. This narrative possesses a seductive clarity that makes it temporarily attractive despite its obvious inadequacies. The guilt and self-doubt that have plagued the exile since her awakening could be reframed as misplaced shame over actions that were not just justified, but heroic. The hunger that has replaced her connection to the Force could be understood as a temporary affliction that will heal with time and proper meditation. the spreading corruption throughout the galaxy could be dismissed as unrelated phenomena that have been incorrectly attributed to events on Malachor V. Baudur finds particular comfort in this interpretation. His own guilt over creating the mass shadow generator temporarily eased by the suggestion that their weapon had served a noble purpose. During their conversations in the Enclave's restored meditation gardens, he speaks of the relief that comes with believing that their choices during the war's final days were not just necessary, but righteous. The alternative, acknowledging that they had participated in the creation of something fundamentally evil, requires a level of self-examination that threatens to destroy whatever peace he has managed to construct for himself. Yet even as this comfortable narrative takes shape, inconsistencies begin to emerge that resist easy explanation. Chrysia's reaction to Vruk's pronouncements carries an undertone of amusement that suggests she finds his certainty more entertaining than convincing. Her questions probe the gaps in his knowledge with surgical precision, revealing areas where his confident assertions rest on assumptions rather than verifiable facts. The old woman's obvious familiarity with details that Vruk clearly does not understand creates an uncomfortable tension that undermines his authority. The other survivors they encounter on Dantooine tell stories that do not align cleanly with the heroic narrative being constructed around the exiles' actions. Farmers who remember the final days of the war speak of Republic forces that seemed changed in fundamental ways, soldiers whose eyes held a hunger that had nothing to do with ordinary military aggression. The abandoned settlements scattered throughout the planet's countryside show signs of evacuation that occurred not during the Mandalorian occupation, but in the years following the Republic's victory. Most troubling are the reports from individuals who claim to have encountered other veterans of the Malachor V campaign during their travels throughout the galaxy. These accounts describe people who seem disconnected from their surroundings in ways that go beyond simple trauma, individuals whose presence creates an atmosphere of unease that affects even those with no Force sensitivity. The pattern these stories reveal suggests that whatever happened above that cursed world created multiple individuals with characteristics similar to those displayed by the exile. Tan's growing discomfort with the heroic interpretation becomes increasingly obvious, despite his attempts to maintain his usual facade of casual indifference. His knowledge of Republic intelligence operations during the war years allows him to identify gaps in the official records that suggest systematic suppression of information about certain military units and their activities. The questions he raises about resource allocation and troop movements reveal strategic decisions that make sense only if the Republic's leadership possessed knowledge of Sith techniques that should not have been available to them. The investigation into these discrepancies leads them to the ruins of sub-level installations beneath the Enclave that were never mentioned in any official documentation. These chambers, accessible only through passages that have been deliberately concealed, contain equipment that clearly predates the Mandalorian Wars by centuries. The technology found here operates according to principles that blend conventional electronics with Force-sensitive materials in ways that suggest deep understanding of Sith engineering techniques. Among the artifacts recovered from these hidden chambers are recordings that document experiments conducted during the early days of the war, research into methods for enhancing Force abilities through exposure to controlled trauma. The subjects of these studies were volunteers from among the Jedi who had chosen to join the Republic military, individuals who believed they were participating in efforts to develop better techniques for healing battlefield injuries. The reality, as revealed by the surviving documentation, was far more sinister. The experiments described in these files involved deliberate attempts to create artificial Force wounds, carefully controlled injuries to subjects' connection to the cosmic energy that would theoretically allow for the development of new abilities. The researchers, whose identities remain carefully obscured in the records, believed that the limitations placed on Jedi power by traditional training methods could be overcome through strategic application of the same principles that gave Sith Lords their enhanced capabilities. The results of this research program were uniformly catastrophic for the test subjects. creating individuals whose connection to the Force became twisted into something resembling the hunger displayed by known Sith practitioners. Rather than abandoning the experiments, the researchers refined their techniques based on the failures, developing methods that would be less immediately destructive while achieving similar fundamental changes to Force sensitivity. The final phases of the program, conducted during the war's closing months, had focused on battlefield applications that would allow for the mass production of Force-sensitive individuals with enhanced combat capabilities. The Vrok's reaction to these revelations demonstrates the limitations of his supposedly comprehensive understanding of recent galactic history. His genuine shock at the existence of these records suggests that even senior members of the Jedi Council had been deliberately kept ignorant of research activities that were conducted literally beneath their own facilities. The compartmentalization of information within the Republic's military and intelligence structures had been far more extensive than anyone who was not directly involved could have imagined. As the comfortable narrative of heroic sacrifice begins to crumble under the weight of these discoveries, the true scope of the conspiracy that shaped the Mandalorian Wars starts to become visible. The conflict had not been simply a defensive action against an aggressive enemy, but a carefully orchestrated laboratory experiment designed to test theoretical applications of Sith knowledge on a galactic scale. The Republic's victory had been achieved not through superior tactics or technology, but through the systematic corruption of its own defenders using techniques borrowed from their supposed enemies. The implications of this understanding extend far beyond questions of historical accuracy to threaten the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization has been built. If the Republic's most celebrated military victory was actually the result of embracing the same darkness it claimed to oppose, then the moral framework that justifies current political structures becomes highly questionable. The spreading corruption throughout the galaxy begins to look less like an unfortunate side effect and more like the predictable outcome of deliberate choices made by individuals who understood exactly what they were unleashing. Standing among the ruins of the Jedi Enclave as night falls over Dantooine's grasslands, Meetra contemplates the collapse of the last comfortable illusions about her role in recent history. The heroic narrative that briefly offered the possibility of redemption has been revealed as yet another layer of deception, leaving only the terrible clarity of understanding what she actually participated in during those final campaigns. The journey ahead will require confronting not just her own corruption but the systematic betrayal of everything the Republic claimed to represent. The hyperspace journey to Korriban unfolds in contemplative silence, each member of their small crew processing the revelations uncovered on Dantooine according to their own capacity for accepting terrible truths. The ship's navigation computer displays their destination with clinical precision, coordinates that lead to a world where the accumulated darkness of millennia has crystallized into something approaching physical reality. Here in the tombs of ancient Sith Lords, they will seek answers to questions that civilized beings should never have to ask. Korriban's red sands stretch endlessly beneath a sky the color of dried blood, while massive monuments to long-dead tyrants cast shadows that seem to move independently of their light sources. The Valley of the Dark Lords receives them with the patient hunger of a predator that has learned to wait centuries between meals, its stone guardians watching their approach with eyes that were carved by artisans who understood things that modern sculptors have forgotten. The very air tastes of copper and ozone, as if recent lightning strikes have left the atmosphere permanently charged with violent potential. Chrysia's familiarity with this desolate landscape becomes impossible to ignore as she guides them through passages that do not appear on any archaeological survey. Her knowledge extends beyond academic study to include practical understanding of which tombs remain active and which have been rendered safe through the passage of time or the intervention of previous explorers. When she speaks of the ancient Sith Lords buried here, her tone carries the respect reserved for teachers rather than the revulsion appropriate for historical enemies. The tomb of Ajuntapal, first Dark Lord of the Sith, offers their initial glimpse into the true nature of what they are investigating. The burial chamber's walls are covered with inscriptions that predate the establishment of the Republic by thousands of years, hieroglyphs that seem to shift and change when observed directly. The ghostly presence that manifests within the tomb speaks in archaic dialects that should be incomprehensible, yet the meaning becomes clear through methods that bypass conventional linguistic understanding. The ancient spirit's testimony reveals the existence of techniques for manipulating the Force that were developed during the earliest days of Sith civilization, methods for creating deliberate wounds in the cosmic energy that could be exploited for various purposes. The fallen Jedi who became the first Sith Lords had discovered these principles through experimentation that would have horrified their former colleagues, learning to feed upon death and suffering in ways that enhanced their power while fundamentally altering their connection to the Force itself. Most significantly, Ajunta Pal's ghost speaks of prophecies that describe the eventual return of these techniques to galactic prominence, predictions that suggest the Mandalorian Wars were merely the latest iteration of a cycle that has repeated throughout history. The spirit's fragmented memories include references to other conflicts where similar weapons were deployed, wars that were deliberately orchestrated to create the conditions necessary for mass-producing Force wounds on the scale required to fundamentally alter the galaxy's spiritual ecosystem. Deeper exploration of the tomb complex reveals chambers that were clearly modified during the recent past, areas where modern equipment has been installed among artifacts that predate recorded history. The technology found here represents a fusion of contemporary engineering with principles derived from ancient Sith alchemy, creating devices capable of amplifying and directing the kind of energies that were unleashed above Malachor V. The installation suggests that someone has been using these tombs as research facilities for studies that built upon the work conducted during the Mandalorian Wars. Visas Mai joins their expedition as they venture into the tomb of Tulak Horde, her presence adding another layer of complexity to their investigation. The Miraluka's homeworld of Qatar was consumed entirely by Darth Nithilus, every living being on the planet, drained of life force in a feeding that lasted mere hours. Her survival of that holocaust was not accidental but carefully arranged, leaving her as the sole witness to what happens when the hunger that drives beings like the Exile reaches its ultimate expression. Her testimony about Nihilus provides crucial insight into what the Exile might eventually become if the wound she carries continues to grow unchecked. The Sith Lord's consumption of Qatar was not motivated by strategic considerations or personal vendetta, but by simple necessity, the inevitable result of a hunger that can never be permanently satisfied. Visas describes him as existing in a state of constant starvation, each act of feeding providing only temporary relief before the emptiness reasserts itself with increased intensity. The pattern she describes matches disturbingly well with changes the Exile has been experiencing since leaving Peragus Station. The disconnection from the Force that once felt like simple absence has begun to transform into something more active and demanding. Proximity to other Force-sensitive individuals now creates sensations that resemble appetite more than loneliness, while extended periods without such contact result in a restless agitation that defies conventional explanation. The tomb of Marka Ragnos contains inscriptions that document the development of techniques for creating what the ancient Sith called Force bonds, connections between individuals that allowed for the sharing of power and experience across vast distances. The methods described in these texts bear uncomfortable similarities to the relationships the Exile finds herself developing with her traveling companions, bonds that seem to form spontaneously and grow stronger, despite her attempts to maintain emotional distance. These connections manifest in ways that go beyond simple friendship or loyalty to include actual sharing of life force, a process that strengthens the Exile while gradually weakening those bonded to her. The effect is subtle enough that the affected individuals may not recognize what is happening to them, experiencing the gradual drain as simple fatigue or minor illness rather than systematic consumption of their vital essence. The long-term implications of such relationships include the eventual complete absorption of bonded individuals into the consciousness of the dominant partner. As night falls over the Valley of the Dark Lords, their camp becomes a temporary island of artificial light, surrounded by darkness that seems almost tangible in its intensity. The conversations that develop around their modest fire carry an intimacy that emerges naturally from shared proximity to truths that isolate them from the rest of galactic civilization. Each member of their group has been marked by experiences that prevent comfortable integration into normal society, creating bonds forged through mutual recognition of damaged souls seeking understanding rather than healing. Aton's carefully maintained facade of cynical detachment begins to crack as the weight of their discoveries accumulates beyond his ability to process them through humor and deflection. His background in Republic intelligence operations during the war years includes direct experience with classified projects that now appear to have been preliminary studies for the research that culminated in the mass shadow generators deployment. His knowledge of interrogation techniques designed specifically for use against Force-sensitive subjects reveals the existence of systematic programs aimed at understanding and exploiting the weaknesses inherent in traditional Jedi training. The revelation that emerges through these conversations is that the Republic's intelligence services had been infiltrated or co-opted by individuals with deep knowledge of Sith techniques years before the Mandalorian Wars began. The conflict itself had been engineered to provide cover for experimental programs that would have been impossible to conduct during peacetime, with entire military units serving as unwitting test subjects for applications of theoretical force manipulation. The systematic corruption of Jedi who volunteered for military service was not an unfortunate side effect, but the primary objective of campaigns that were designed from the beginning to produce Force-sensitive individuals with enhanced combat capabilities. Chrysa's role in orchestrating these revelations becomes increasingly obvious as the pieces of the larger puzzle fall into place around their campfire discussions. Her questions and observations consistently guide their investigation towards specific discoveries, while her apparent foreknowledge of what they will find suggests involvement in events that predates her supposed first encounter with the Exile. The manipulation is subtle but systematic, creating the impression of natural discovery while actually following a carefully planned curriculum designed to prepare them for whatever confrontation awaits at the end of their journey. The meditation that concludes their first day on Korriban takes place in an atmosphere charged with energies that make conventional force techniques impossible, while simultaneously opening pathways to abilities that violate fundamental principles of Jedi philosophy. The ancient tombs serve as amplifiers for the kind of power that the Exile carries within herself, allowing her to perceive the true scope of the infection that has been spreading throughout the galaxy since the end of the Mandalorian Wars. The vision that emerges during this corrupted meditation reveals force wounds scattered throughout Republic space, each one serving as a breeding ground for the development of individuals whose abilities mirror those displayed by veterans of Malachor 5. The pattern suggests deliberate cultivation rather than random occurrence, as if someone has been systematically creating conditions that will produce a new generation of Force users whose powers derive from hunger rather than harmony with the cosmic energy. As dawn breaks over Korriban's desolate landscape, painting the ancient monuments in shades of red that seem appropriate for their grim purpose, the true nature of their quest begins to become clear. They are not investigating historical events or seeking personal redemption, but attempting to understand and possibly prevent a transformation that threatens to fundamentally alter the relationship between conscious beings and the Force itself. The journey ahead will require venturing into even darker territory, places where the boundaries between life and death have become meaningless, and where the very concept of individual identity dissolves into something far more fluid and terrifying. The deeper chambers beneath Korriban's tombs reveal architectural features that predate any known Sith construction, suggesting that the dark side users who built their monuments here were themselves following much older patterns. Passages carved from living rock spiral downward in configurations that seem designed to channel and concentrate specific types of force energy, their walls lined with crystalline formations that pulse with barely perceptible rhythms. These ancient spaces feel less like burial chambers and more like laboratories where the fundamental nature of life and death was subjected to experimental manipulation across millennia. Within the tomb of Nagasado, they discover repositories of knowledge that detail the systematic development of techniques for creating artificial force bonds between master and student, methods that allowed Sith Lords to extend their consciousness beyond the normal limitations of individual mortality. The holocrons stored here speak in voices that carry the authority of beings who achieved forms of immortality that make conventional death irrelevant, their wisdom preserved through processes that blur the line between technology and mysticism. The information contained within these ancient records reveals that the hunger which characterizes beings like the Exile and Nihilus is not a perversion of natural force abilities, but rather a return to more primitive methods of interacting with cosmic energy. Before the development of Jedi philosophy, with its emphasis on harmony and balance, force-sensitive individuals learned to survive by consuming the life essence of others, treating the galaxy's spiritual ecosystem as a resource to be harvested rather than a community to be served. Kraya's commentary on these revelations demonstrates knowledge that extends far beyond what any academic study could provide. Her observations carrying the weight of personal experience with the techniques being described. When she speaks of the relationship between master and apprentice in Sith tradition, her words carry implications that make her own connection to the Exile appear in a fundamentally different light. The bonds that have been forming between them throughout their journey are not accidental but carefully cultivated according to principles that predate the Republic by thousands of years. The psychological impact of these discoveries begins to manifest in increasingly obvious ways among their traveling companions. Atum's attempts to maintain his usual facade of casual indifference fail as the systematic nature of the manipulation they have uncovered becomes impossible to ignore. His background in Republic intelligence work included participation in programs that he now understands were designed to identify and corrupt force-sensitive individuals who could be converted into weapons similar to those produced by the Malachor V experiment. Bauder's engineering expertise allows him to understand the technical aspects of the ancient devices they encounter, but the knowledge brings with it a recognition that his creation of the mass shadow generator was not an isolated innovation, but part of a research program that had been developing similar weapons for centuries. The specifications he was given during the war's final months were not the product of desperate improvisation, but refinements of designs that had been tested and perfected through applications that were kept secret from everyone except the highest levels of Republic leadership. The equipment they discover in the deepest chambers includes devices capable of recording and replaying force impressions with unprecedented fidelity, technology that allows them to experience directly the memories and sensations preserved within the tomb's crystalline matrices. Through these recordings, they witness firsthand the experiments conducted by ancient Sith Lords as they developed the techniques that would eventually be employed during the Mandalorian Wars, observing the systematic corruption of test subjects who believed they were participating in spiritual advancement rather than fundamental transformation. Most disturbing among these preserved experiences are records that document the deliberate creation of force wounds as weapons against enemy populations, techniques that allowed relatively small numbers of corrupted force users to drain the life force from entire worlds over periods of days or weeks. The methods employed bear uncomfortable similarities to the effects observed on planets that were subjected to Republic superweapons during the recent conflict, suggesting that what was presented as advanced military technology was actually the application of principles learned from studying ancient Sith techniques. Visas Ma's reaction to these revelations provides crucial insight into the psychological state of someone who has survived direct exposure to the kind of feeding that these weapons were designed to facilitate. Her description of the consumption of Qatar includes details that match precisely with the effects documented in the ancient records, confirming that beings like Nihilus represent not unprecedented aberrations, but successful applications of techniques that have been refined through millennia of experimentation. The connection between her homeworld's destruction and the exile's condition becomes increasingly obvious as they explore deeper into the tomb complex. The hunger that drives both individuals operates according to identical principles, differing only in degree and level of conscious control. The wound that the exile carries within herself is not healing with time, but growing stronger, fed by her proximity to other Force-sensitive beings, and gradually developing into the same kind of consuming need that ultimately destroyed Qatar. The ancient texts describe this progression as inevitable once the initial corruption has taken root, a transformation that cannot be reversed through conventional healing methods or meditation techniques. The only recorded instances of successful intervention involved procedures that were themselves so traumatic that they frequently resulted in the complete destruction of the subject's connection to the Force, leaving behind individuals who were technically alive but spiritually dead in ways that made normal existence impossible. As they prepare to leave Korriban's surface, the accumulated weight of their discoveries creates an atmosphere of grim understanding that affects even their most basic interactions. Conversations become stilted as each member of their group processes the implications of what they have learned about the nature of their relationships with each other. The bonds that seemed natural and beneficial now appear as symptoms of a corruption that may already have progressed beyond the point where voluntary separation is possible. The departure from the ancient Sith world requires navigating through defense systems that activate in response to their attempts to remove artifacts from the tomb complex, automated guardians that have been waiting centuries for the opportunity to test their capabilities against living intruders. The technology employed by these defenses operates according to principles that blend conventional engineering with Force-based techniques, creating weapons that adapt to their target's abilities in real time while drawing power from the spiritual energy released through combat. The running battle through Korriban's ancient corridors provides a practical demonstration of how the abilities they have been developing throughout their journey differ from traditional Jedi techniques. Rather than drawing upon the Force for strength and guidance, they find themselves instinctively employing methods that consume the life force of their opponents, draining energy from defeated enemies to fuel their own enhanced capabilities. The experience is simultaneously exhilarating and horrifying, offering power that exceeds anything they previously believed possible, while demanding payment in the form of spiritual corruption that may prove irreversible. During the escape from Korriban's atmosphere, their ship's sensors detect unusual energy readings throughout the system that suggest the presence of other vessels employing similar stealth technologies. The pattern of these contacts indicates systematic surveillance rather than random traffic, confirming that their investigation has attracted the attention of forces that prefer to remain unobserved. The implications include the possibility that their entire journey has been monitored by individuals whose agenda extends beyond simple intelligence gathering to encompass active manipulation of their discoveries. The hyperspace jump away from the Sith homeworld provides an opportunity for reflection on the knowledge they have gained and its implications for their continuing quest. The revelations uncovered within the ancient tombs have transformed their understanding of recent galactic history from a narrative of heroic sacrifice into something far more sinister and complex. The Republic's victory over the Mandalorians now appears as merely one phase in a much larger plan that spans centuries and involves the systematic corruption of Force-sensitive individuals on a galactic scale. The path ahead leads toward confrontations with the surviving Jedi Masters who participated in the Exile's original trial, encounters that will require applying their newfound understanding to individuals who may themselves be unwitting victims of the same corruption they are investigating. The possibility that the entire Jedi Order has been infiltrated or co-opted by forces employing ancient Sith techniques creates strategic challenges that extend far beyond simple combat or negotiation into questions of fundamental trust and the nature of identity itself. As their ship travels through the depths of hyperspace toward their next destination, each member of their crew contemplates the personal cost of the knowledge they have acquired, and the increasingly likely possibility that their quest for understanding may ultimately require sacrifices that will fundamentally alter who they are as individuals. The corruption they carry within themselves continues to grow stronger with each revelation, fed by proximity to the truth they seek, and gradually transforming them into something that may no longer be entirely human. The return to Dantooine reveals a world transformed by their absence, as if their investigation into ancient secrets has somehow altered the fundamental nature of reality around the agricultural planet. The Jedi Enclave, previously a symbol of attempted restoration and hope, now radiates an atmosphere of barely contained dread that affects even the local wildlife. Animals that once grazed peacefully in the surrounding grasslands now avoid the ruins entirely, while the crystal formations that dot the landscape pulse with rhythms that seem synchronized to no natural phenomenon. Master Vrook's demeanor has changed dramatically since their previous encounter, his former confidence replaced by a haunted awareness that suggests he has been forced to confront truths that shatter his fundamental understanding of the galaxy. The other surviving council members, Masters Kavar and Zez Kael, have arrived on Dantooine bearing their own burdens of terrible knowledge, their presence creating a convergence of guilt and fear that makes the very air seem thick with unspoken confessions. The reunion that takes place in the rebuilt council chambers carries none of the formal dignity traditionally associated with Jedi proceedings, instead resembling more closely an intervention staged by individuals who have finally accepted the futility of maintaining comfortable lives. Each of the Masters brings with them evidence of corruption that has been spreading throughout the galaxy since the end of the Mandalorian Wars, testimonies from across the Republic that describe Force-sensitive individuals developing abilities that violate every principle of traditional Jedi understanding. Master Kavar's reports from the core worlds paint a picture of systematic infiltration that extends far beyond simple political influence into the actual manipulation of Force-sensitive bloodlines across multiple generations. Families with strong connections to the Force have been systematically identified and subjected to influences designed to enhance specific traits while suppressing others, creating a breeding program aimed at producing individuals whose abilities align more closely with ancient Sith techniques than traditional Jedi powers. The evidence he presents includes genetic analysis conducted by Republic medical facilities that reveal markers consistent with exposure to artificial Force wounds, modifications that appear to be inherited rather than acquired through direct trauma. Children born to parents who served in the Mandalorian Wars display characteristics that should not be possible according to conventional understanding of Force sensitivity, abilities that manifest early and grow stronger with age rather than requiring years of training to develop. Master Zez Kael contributes intelligence gathered from the Outer Rim territories that describes entire star systems where normal patterns of Force interaction have been fundamentally disrupted. Planets that were never directly involved in the recent conflicts now host populations that display collective behavioral changes consistent with exposure to the kind of psychic manipulation employed during the war's final campaigns. The affected worlds share common characteristics that suggest deliberate selection rather than random occurrence. Most significantly, these reports describe the emergence of individuals whose abilities mirror those displayed by the Exile, people who seem to exist in a state of disconnection from the Force while simultaneously exerting influence over it that exceeds anything previously documented. These beings appear capable of forming bonds with others that result in the gradual transfer of life force from the bonded individuals to themselves, creating relationships that strengthen the dominant partner while slowly consuming those connected to them. The pattern revealed by combining these reports creates a comprehensive picture of galactic transformation that extends far beyond the personal trauma of individual veterans to encompass a fundamental alteration in how the Force operates throughout civilized space. The wound created above Malachor V was not an isolated incident, but the focal point of a process that has been spreading outward like an infection, touching every Force-sensitive individual in ways that may ultimately prove irreversible. The revelation that emerges from their collective testimony is that the Jedi Council itself has been systematically compromised for decades, infiltrated by influences that guided their decisions during the Mandalorian Wars toward outcomes that appeared tactically sound while actually serving a much larger agenda. The choice to allow certain Jedi to join the Republic military was not made through independent judgment, but through manipulation by advisors whose true loyalties remained carefully concealed. The most devastating confession comes from Master Vrook himself, who admits that the trial which resulted in the exile's banishment was conducted not according to Jedi law, but in response to direct pressure from Republic intelligence agencies that demanded her removal from any position where she might influence other Force-sensitive individuals. The Council's fear of her condition was genuine, but their response was shaped by outside forces that understood the implications of her transformation far better than they did. This acknowledgement opens pathways for discussions that reveal the true scope of the conspiracy that has shaped recent galactic history. The Mandalorian Wars themselves were orchestrated by individuals with access to ancient Sith knowledge, conflicts designed specifically to create conditions that would allow for mass production of Force wounds on the scale required to fundamentally alter the galaxy's spiritual ecosystem. The Republic's victory was achieved through embracing techniques that transformed its defenders into the very enemy they believed they were fighting against. The strategic implications of this revelation extend beyond questions of historical accuracy to encompass the current political structure of the galaxy itself. If the Republic's most celebrated military leaders were systematically corrupted through exposure to Sith techniques, then the government they now serve may itself be fundamentally compromised. The possibility that the Senate and its various agencies have been infiltrated by forces whose agenda includes the continued spread of Force wounds throughout civilized space creates strategic challenges that cannot be addressed through conventional political or military action. Kraya's response to these confessions demonstrates a level of satisfaction that confirms her role in orchestrating events to reach precisely this point of revelation. Her questions probe the emotional and psychological impact of the Masters' admissions with surgical precision, forcing them to confront not just what they did, but why they found it possible to rationalize choices that violated everything they claimed to believe. The manipulation is subtle but systematic, designed to strip away the last vestiges of self-deception that might interfere with whatever plan she has been developing. The discussion that follows reveals additional layers of the deception that has shaped their understanding of recent events. The mass shadow generator itself was not an isolated innovation, but part of a research program that spanned decades and involved multiple Republic facilities working on different aspects of the same fundamental project. The weapons specifications were derived from studies of ancient Sith artifacts that had been secretly acquired and reverse-engineered by teams that included individuals with direct knowledge of the techniques they were attempting to replicate. The engineers who worked on the project, including Baudur, were provided with technical specifications that appeared to represent advanced Republic research, but were actually refinements of designs that had been tested during previous conflicts throughout galactic history. The systematic nature of this deception suggests coordination that extends across multiple generations, indicating the existence of an organization or conspiracy that operates according to timescales that dwarf normal political or military planning cycles. Most disturbing of all is the revelation that the techniques employed during the Mandalorian Wars were not experimental applications of theoretical knowledge, but practical implementations of methods that had been perfected through previous testing on smaller scales. The Republic's willingness to employ these weapons was not a desperate decision made in the face of inevitable defeat, but the culmination of a plan that had been developing for centuries, waiting for the appropriate moment to transform from covert research into open application. The personal cost of these revelations becomes apparent as each member of their group processes the implications of learning that their most fundamental assumptions about their own identities and motivations have been systematically manipulated by forces they never suspected existed. The bonds that have developed between them throughout their journey are revealed not as natural friendships, but as symptoms of the same corruption that has been spreading throughout the galaxy since the end of the war. The Exile's own condition takes on new significance when viewed in this context, her disconnection from the Force representing not a unique trauma, but a prototype for a transformation that is intended to affect all Force-sensitive individuals throughout the galaxy. The hunger that has been growing within her is not healing with time, but developing according to patterns that were established through centuries of research and experimentation, following a progression that will ultimately result in abilities that mirror those displayed by ancient Sith Lords. The conversation that develops around these revelations creates an atmosphere of shared understanding that transcends the formal relationships that previously defined their interactions. Each participant contributes pieces of a puzzle that none of them could have solved individually, while the emotional intimacy created by confronting such terrible truths forges connections that operate according to principles that bypass conventional social boundaries. As night falls over Dantooine's grasslands, the weight of their collective knowledge creates a burden that cannot be shared with anyone outside their small group. The isolation that results from possessing information too dangerous for general distribution binds them together in ways that make separation increasingly difficult to contemplate. The path ahead will require actions that violate the moral principles they once believed were fundamental to their identities, choices that can only be made by individuals who have already accepted that redemption may no longer be possible. The deeper archives hidden beneath Dantooine's surface reveal documentation that spans millennia of galactic history, records that have been carefully preserved by an organization whose existence predates the Republic itself by thousands of years. These chambers, accessible only through passages sealed by both technological and Force-based security measures, contain evidence of a conspiracy so vast and enduring that it challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of civilization in the galaxy. The holographic records stored within crystalline matrices speak in voices that span generations of conspirators, each adding their knowledge to a collective understanding that treats individual civilizations as temporary phenomena to be manipulated and discarded according to larger patterns. The beings whose testimonies are preserved here speak casually of orchestrating the rise and fall of entire stellar governments, of guiding the development of species and technologies according to plans that encompass evolutionary timescales. Among the most significant revelations is evidence that the Force itself has been systematically altered through interventions that began shortly after the first sentient beings developed the ability to manipulate cosmic energy. The natural harmony that supposedly characterizes the Force's original state was actually disrupted through deliberate actions taken by entities whose understanding of universal principles exceeded that of any species currently known to galactic civilization. The documentation describes a process of gradual corruption that has been ongoing for millions of years, with each major galactic conflict serving as an opportunity to introduce additional modifications that push Force-sensitive beings toward increased aggression and self-interest. The patterns that emerge from studying this vast historical record reveal that every significant war, including the conflicts between ancient Jedi and Sith, was orchestrated to produce specific changes in how conscious beings interact with the cosmic energy that connects all life. The Mandalorian Wars, viewed in this context, represent merely the most recent phase in a project that has been systematically transforming the galaxy's spiritual ecosystem toward a state that will eventually eliminate the possibility of genuine harmony between sentient beings and the Force. The techniques employed during that conflict were not innovations developed under pressure of military necessity, but applications of methods that had been refined through testing during previous wars that were themselves deliberately created for experimental purposes. Most disturbing is the evidence that this transformation is approaching a critical threshold, beyond which the changes will become irreversible. The proliferation of individuals like the Exile throughout the galaxy indicates that the process has reached a stage where it will continue to spread, even without additional direct intervention. The wounds in the Force created by weapons like the mass shadow generator serve as seeds that will eventually grow to consume the entire galactic ecosystem of Force-sensitive life. The identity of the entities responsible for orchestrating this vast conspiracy remains deliberately obscured in the records, their nature described only through references that suggest beings whose relationship to normal physical existence differs fundamentally from that of any known species. The testimonies speak of masters whose consciousness exists partially outside the normal constraints of space and time, entities capable of influencing events across multiple star systems simultaneously while remaining effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. These Shadow Masters appear to operate according to motivations that transcend the political and economic concerns that drive normal civilizations. Their agenda focused on achieving a form of existence that requires the systematic consumption of life force on a galactic scale. The transformation they are working to achieve would ultimately result in a universe where conscious beings exist primarily as sources of spiritual energy to be harvested by entities that have transcended individual mortality through techniques that blur the line between life and death. The role of the Sith throughout galactic history is revealed to have been fundamentally different from what conventional understanding suggests. Their apparent opposition to Jedi philosophy actually serving the larger agenda of these hidden masters, rather than representing genuine alternative approaches to Force manipulation. Both Jedi and Sith traditions were carefully cultivated to produce specific types of Force-sensitive individuals whose conflicts would generate the psychic energy required to power the gradual transformation of the galaxy's spiritual ecosystem. The ancient Sith lords whose tombs they explored on Korriban were not independent practitioners of dark side techniques, but agents whose understanding of Force manipulation was provided by these Shadow Masters in exchange for their cooperation in implementing specific aspects of the larger plan. The artifacts and knowledge preserved within those tombs were intended to be discovered by future generations of Force users who would inevitably employ that information in ways that accelerated the spread of corruption throughout the galaxy. The systematic infiltration of Republic institutions that enabled the deployment of weapons like the mass shadow generator was accomplished through the placement of agents whose loyalty to the Shadow Masters superseded any allegiance to conventional governments or philosophical movements. These individuals, many of whom possessed only limited understanding of the true nature of their mission, were positioned throughout the Republic's military and political hierarchy generations before the Mandalorian Wars began. The revelation that forces Meetra to confront the true nature of her own condition is the understanding that her disconnection from the Force was not the result of trauma, but the successful completion of a transformation that was planned from the moment she first demonstrated Force sensitivity as a child. Her entire life, from her initial training as a Jedi through her service during the Mandalorian Wars, was carefully orchestrated to produce exactly the type of wound in the Force that she now carries within herself. The strategic importance of her specific case lies not in her individual capabilities, but in her function as a template for mass-producing similar transformations throughout the galaxy's Force-sensitive population. The techniques that created her condition can be replicated and scaled to affect entire worlds of beings with varying degrees of Force sensitivity, creating the widespread spiritual devastation required to complete the Shadow Master's ultimate objective. Chrysia's true identity finally becomes clear. through documents that describe her role as one of the primary architects of the conspiracy that shaped the Mandalorian Wars. An individual whose understanding of ancient Sith techniques was provided directly by the Shadow Masters in exchange for her cooperation in implementing their plan. Her manipulation of events throughout the exile's journey was not motivated by personal vendetta or philosophical differences, but by the necessity of guiding the transformation process toward its intended conclusion. The elderly woman's apparent concern for the exile's welfare was actually careful management of a crucial experimental subject whose successful development was essential for the next phase of the project. Her teachings about strength through conflict and the necessity of embracing darkness were not expressions of personal philosophy, but systematic conditioning designed to prepare the exile for her ultimate role as a weapon against the remaining untransformed Force users in the galaxy. The bonds that have developed between the exile and her companions are revealed to be artificial constructs created through the application of techniques that bypass normal psychological defenses, connections that serve the dual purpose of providing the exile with sources of life force to consume, while simultaneously creating test subjects for studying how the transformation spreads between individuals. The apparent loyalty and friendship displayed by her traveling companions is actually a form of spiritual parasitism that will ultimately result in their complete absorption into her consciousness. The documents describe the final phase of the project as requiring the systematic elimination of all remaining Jedi Masters who retain sufficient connection to the untransformed Force to potentially interfere with the spreading corruption. This process will be accomplished not through direct confrontation, but through the deployment of transformed individuals like the Exile, who can drain the life force of traditional Force users while appearing to seek reconciliation or understanding. The strategic brilliance of this approach lies in its exploitation of the compassionate nature that characterizes most Jedi. Their willingness to help apparently wounded individuals, making them vulnerable to techniques that turn their own desire to heal others into the mechanism of their destruction. The surviving council members who have gathered on Dantooine represent ideal targets for this phase of the operation, their guilt over their role in the exile's original trauma, creating emotional vulnerabilities that can be exploited to facilitate their consumption. The revelation of this ultimate purpose creates a moment of terrible clarity in which all the seemingly random events of their journey resolve into a pattern of calculated manipulation extending across decades of careful planning. Every choice that appeared to offer hope for redemption or understanding was actually a step along a path designed to lead inevitably toward the completion of the Shadow Master's agenda. The personal cost of this understanding extends beyond simple betrayal to encompass a fundamental questioning of the nature of individual identity and free will. If every significant decision has been the result of manipulation by forces whose influence extends back to childhood, then the question of personal responsibility becomes meaningless in ways that threaten the basic assumptions upon which moral reasoning depends. Standing in the ancient archives beneath Dantooine, as the weight of these revelations settles upon them, each member of their group must confront the possibility that they are not heroes embarked upon a quest for truth, but weapons being deployed against targets whose only crime was maintaining connection to aspects of the Force that the Shadow Masters have determined must be eliminated. The path ahead offers only choices between different forms of damnation, with redemption eliminated as a possibility by the systematic corruption of every potential source of salvation. The darkness that surrounds them is not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something actively hostile to the continued existence of consciousness as it has traditionally been understood, a force that seeks to reduce all sentient beings to sources of energy, to be consumed by entities whose nature transcends individual mortality through methods that violate every principle upon which galactic civilization has been built. The convocation that assembles in the deepest chambers beneath Dantooine represents perhaps the last gathering of individuals who retain sufficient knowledge to understand the true scope of the crisis facing the galaxy. Each participant brings fragments of a vast puzzle whose complete picture reveals a universe very different from what any conventional education would suggest. A reality where the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization are revealed to be carefully constructed illusions maintained by forces whose agenda transcends normal political or philosophical concerns. Master Idris arrives bearing holocrons that were thought lost during the purges that followed the Jedi Civil War. Ancient repositories of knowledge that contain testimonies from Force users whose understanding of cosmic principles predates the establishment of current philosophical schools by millennia. The voices preserved within these crystalline matrices speak of a time when the relationship between conscious beings and the Force operated according to very different principles, an era when the hunger that now characterizes beings like the Exile was actually the normal state of existence for all Force-sensitive individuals. The testimonies describe a gradual transformation that occurred over thousands of generations, during which the natural predatory relationship between Force users and the general population was systematically modified through interventions whose ultimate purpose remained hidden from those who implemented them. The development of Jedi philosophy, with its emphasis on harmony and service to others, represented not spiritual evolution but careful conditioning designed to create a population of Force-sensitive beings whose abilities could be more easily harvested by entities operating according to the older, more direct methods of energy consumption. Jolie Bindel contributes knowledge gathered during decades of wandering through the galaxy's forgotten corners, testimonies from individuals whose isolation from mainstream civilization allowed them to preserve understanding that would have been suppressed or distorted by official institutions. His accounts describe entire worlds where the population displays characteristics consistent with exposure to artificial Force wounds, planets where the local ecosystem has been fundamentally altered through processes that turn the natural web of life into something resembling a feeding mechanism for entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. The pattern that emerges from comparing these various sources of information reveals a galaxy-wide transformation that has been proceeding according to carefully planned stages for millions of years. Each major historical epoch, from the first conflicts between primitive Force users through the current crisis, represents a specific phase in a process designed to gradually alter the fundamental nature of consciousness throughout civilized space. The survivors of the recent conflicts each contribute their own pieces to this vast mosaic of understanding. Minakul, the former Republic soldier turned historian, provides analysis of military records that document the systematic deployment of techniques that created localized Force wounds during conflicts that were supposedly conducted according to conventional strategic principles. The patterns he has identified suggest that every major war of the past 1,000 years included experimental applications of methods derived from ancient Sith knowledge. Mira's experience as a bounty hunter on worlds affected by the aftermath of these conflicts provides ground-level perspective on how the spreading corruption manifests in everyday life. Her accounts describe populations that display behavioral changes consistent with gradual spiritual consumption, communities where the normal bonds of mutual support and cooperation have been replaced by relationships based on predation and exploitation that mirror the dynamics observed between transformed Force users and their victims. Brianna, trained from childhood in fighting techniques designed specifically for combat against Force-sensitive opponents, contributes knowledge of an organization that has been monitoring and documenting the spread of Force wounds throughout the galaxy for generations. The Handmaiden Sisters, she reveals, were not simply guardians of Jedi artifacts, but agents of a resistance movement that understood the true nature of the threat facing galactic civilization long before the current crisis became obvious to mainstream institutions. The techniques they preserved include methods for detecting and potentially containing the spread of artificial Force wounds, knowledge that was developed through centuries of careful observation and experimentation by individuals who recognized that conventional approaches to Force manipulation were being systematically corrupted. Their training emphasized psychological and spiritual techniques that could provide some protection against the predatory abilities displayed by transformed Force users. Hanha's presence adds a perspective that transcends the concerns of any individual species or civilization. His understanding rooted in Wookiee traditions that preserve memories of conflicts that predate recorded galactic history. The stories passed down through his people's oral traditions describe cycles of transformation and resistance that span evolutionary timescales, suggesting that the current crisis represents merely the latest iteration of a pattern that has repeated throughout the galaxy's biological development. These ancient tales speak of entities whose existence bridges the gap between individual consciousness and cosmic forces, beings whose relationship to normal physical reality allows them to influence events across multiple star systems while remaining effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. The descriptions match disturbingly well with evidence gathered from other sources about the Shadow Masters who appear to be orchestrating the current transformation. The synthesis of all this information creates a picture of reality that challenges every comfortable assumption about the nature of existence in the galaxy. The Force itself, rather than being a natural cosmic phenomenon that connects all living things, appears to be an artificial construct that was imposed upon the galaxy's spiritual ecosystem by entities whose motivations remain opaque but whose methods involve the systematic consumption of consciousness on scales that dwarf any previously imagined catastrophe. The revelation that forces each participant in this gathering to confront their own complicity in the spreading corruption is the understanding that every individual who possesses Force sensitivity has been systematically conditioned from childhood to serve as either a predator or prey in a system designed to channel spiritual energy toward entities that exist beyond normal mortality. The bonds of friendship, loyalty, and love that seem to develop naturally between Force-sensitive beings are actually artificial constructs that facilitate the transfer of life force between individuals according to patterns established by the Shadow Masters. This recognition transforms their understanding of personal relationships in ways that make normal emotional connections increasingly difficult to maintain. The intimacy created by shared knowledge of terrible truths becomes tainted by the awareness that even their most genuine feelings may be symptoms of manipulation rather than authentic expressions of individual will. Chrysia's role as the architect of their collective enlightenment becomes impossible to ignore as the pieces of her vast manipulation fall into place around their discussions. Her apparent concern for each individual's spiritual development was actually systematic conditioning designed to prepare them for specific roles in the final phase of the project she serves. The wisdom she offered about the nature of strength and the necessity of embracing difficult truths was not philosophical teaching but practical instruction in techniques that would facilitate their transformation into more effective weapons. The old woman's satisfaction with the progress of their understanding demonstrates the success of conditioning methods that have been refined through application to countless previous subjects over millennia of experimentation. Her ability to guide their discoveries while maintaining the illusion that they were reaching these conclusions independently reveals psychological manipulation techniques that bypass normal cognitive defenses through methods that exploit the very desire for truth and understanding that motivates their investigation. The practical implications of their collective knowledge create strategic challenges that cannot be addressed through conventional means, since every traditional institution and source of authority has been systematically compromised by the same forces they are attempting to resist. The Republic government, the Jedi Order, even the supposed opposition represented by various Sith factions, all serve the ultimate agenda of entities whose existence transcends normal political or philosophical categories. The isolation that results from possessing information too dangerous to share creates bonds between the members of their group that operate independently of normal social structures, connections forged through mutual recognition of individuals who have been permanently separated from mainstream civilization by their knowledge of truths that would be rejected or suppressed if revealed to the general population. As their gathering concludes, each participant must confront the reality that they have become something fundamentally different from what they were when their journey began, transformed not through their own choices, but through exposure to understanding that has altered their basic relationship to reality in ways that may prove irreversible. The path ahead offers no possibility of return to their former ignorance, leaving only the question of how to employ their terrible knowledge in service of goals that may themselves be compromised by the same corruption they seek to resist. The darkness that surrounds their small community of understanding is not merely the absence of conventional hope, but the presence of certainties that make normal assumptions about morality and purpose meaningless in ways that threaten the psychological foundations upon which individual identity depends. Yet within this darkness, they must find the strength to continue their quest toward whatever conclusion awaits at the end of a journey that has already transformed them beyond recognition. The final preparations for the return to Malachor V unfold against a backdrop of cosmic inevitability, as if the galaxy itself has been waiting for this moment of reckoning that will determine whether the transformation-consuming Force-sensitive life can be stopped or merely channeled toward a different conclusion. The ship that carries them through hyperspace toward the system where everything began has been modified with technology that blends Republic engineering with principles derived from ancient Sith artifacts, creating a vessel capable of surviving in space where the normal rules governing matter and energy no longer apply predictably. Meetra finds herself contemplating the psychological journey that has brought her to this point, recognizing how each revelation has systematically stripped away the comfortable illusions that once provided structure for her understanding of herself and the galaxy. The woman who awakened in the Kolto tank on Peragus Station believed she was seeking redemption for past mistakes, not realizing that redemption itself was an impossibility for someone whose very existence represents a fundamental violation of the natural order. The hunger that has been growing within her throughout their journey has evolved beyond simple desire for life force into something resembling a cosmic imperative, a need that operates according to principles that transcend individual will or moral consideration. She can feel the approach to Malachor V affecting this internal ecosystem of predation, the proximity to the wound's origin causing resonances that strengthen her abilities, while simultaneously making conscious control increasingly difficult to maintain. Krya's satisfaction with these developments becomes increasingly obvious as they near their destination, her manipulation having successfully guided the transformation process toward the precise configuration required for whatever final purpose she serves. The old woman's teachings about strength through conflict and the necessity of embracing difficult truths are revealed as systematic conditioning designed to prepare the exile for her ultimate role as an instrument of galactic transformation rather than its victim. The other members of their group each process the approaching confrontation according to their own capacity for accepting the implications of what they have learned about their true nature and purpose. Aton's attempts to maintain his facade of casual indifference have completely collapsed, replaced by a grim understanding that his participation in Republic intelligence operations during the war years makes him complicit in the systematic corruption they are attempting to understand. His knowledge of interrogation techniques, designed specifically for use against Force-sensitive subjects, reveals the existence of training programs that prepared Republic operatives for the systematic elimination of traditional Jedi once the transformation process reached its final stages. The realization that he may have been selected for this mission specifically because of his experience in hunting and killing Force users creates psychological tensions that manifest in increasingly erratic behavior as they approach their destination. Visas Mar's connection to the approaching confrontation operates through her traumatic bond with Darth Nihilus, whose consumption of her homeworld represents the logical endpoint of the transformation process that the Exile carries within herself. Her ability to sense the presence of other Force wounds throughout the galaxy has been growing stronger as they journey toward Malachor V, revealing the true scope of the infection that has been spreading since the end of the Mandalorian Wars. The pattern she perceives suggests that the process has reached a critical threshold beyond which it will become self-sustaining, no longer requiring direct intervention by the Shadow Masters to continue consuming Force-sensitive life throughout the galaxy. Individual worlds are beginning to develop their own Force wounds spontaneously, created through the accumulated psychic pressure generated by the systematic consumption of spiritual energy that has been occurring for decades. Bodu's engineering expertise allows him to understand the technical aspects of what they will face on Malachor V. But his knowledge brings with it recognition that the mass shadow generator was designed with capabilities that extend far beyond simple gravitational manipulation. The weapon's true function involved the creation of controlled tiers in the fabric of space-time itself, openings that allow entities existing partially outside normal reality to influence events within the physical universe. His analysis of the device's specifications reveals that the explosion which destroyed the planet's surface was actually a secondary effect, the primary purpose being the creation of a permanent gateway through which the Shadow Masters could extend their influence into the galaxy without requiring the complex infiltration networks they had previously employed. The facility that remains on the planet's ruins serves as a monitoring station and research laboratory where the effects of this dimensional breach can be studied and refined. The approach to the Malachor system reveals space that has been fundamentally altered by the energies released during the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars. Normal navigation becomes impossible as their ship's sensors struggle to process readings that violate basic principles of physics, while the crew experiences psychological effects that suggest exposure to forms of radiation that affect consciousness more directly than mere biology. The debris field that marks the location where the planet once orbited still pulses with energies that create localized distortions in space-time, fragments of destroyed worlds that exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Some pieces of the original planet appear to phase in and out of normal reality, visible to sensors at certain moments while completely absent at others, as if the destruction created a permanent state of quantum uncertainty that affects matter at the molecular level. The facility that serves as their destination materializes gradually as they navigate through the debris field, its structure defying conventional architectural principles through the application of engineering techniques that blend physical construction with force-based manipulation of reality. The buildings appear solid from certain angles while seeming translucent or even ethereal when viewed from others, their existence dependent upon the maintenance of specific psychic conditions that could be disrupted by changes in the local force environment. As their ship docks with the facility's landing bay, each member of the group experiences a moment of profound recognition that this location represents not just the site of past trauma, but the focal point of a transformation that will determine their ultimate fate and the future of Force-sensitive life throughout the galaxy. The choices made here will have consequences that extend far beyond personal redemption or damnation to encompass the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The atmosphere within the facility carries traces of the original catastrophe, psychic impressions preserved within the very structure of the buildings that allow sensitive individuals to experience fragments of the emotions and sensations that accompanied the planet's destruction. These residual memories create a continuous background of anguish and terror that makes normal thought processes increasingly difficult to maintain, while simultaneously strengthening abilities that derive power from suffering and death. Krya's guidance becomes more direct and obvious as they make their way through corridors that seem designed according to principles that prioritize psychological impact over practical function. Her knowledge of the facility's layout demonstrates familiarity that could only result from personal involvement in its construction, while her commentary reveals satisfaction with how completely the environment has been engineered to facilitate the specific type of confrontation she has been orchestrating. The deeper levels of the facility contain equipment that represents the culmination of research programs spanning thousands of years. Technology that combines the most advanced understanding of force manipulation with engineering principles derived from studying entities whose existence transcends normal physical limitations. The devices found here are capable of creating and controlling force wounds with unprecedented precision, allowing for the systematic transformation of entire populations according to predetermined specifications. The ultimate chamber that serves as their destination pulses with energies that make the boundary between individual consciousness and cosmic forces increasingly meaningless. Here, in the heart of the artificial wound created by the mass shadow generator, the final phase of the Shadow Masters' plan will unfold according to patterns established through millennia of careful preparation and manipulation. Standing at the threshold of this ultimate confrontation, Meetra recognizes that every choice available to her has been predetermined by forces whose understanding of psychological manipulation exceeds anything she previously believed possible. The path ahead offers only different forms of service to entities whose agenda includes the systematic consumption of consciousness on a galactic scale, with personal agency revealed as an illusion maintained to facilitate more effective exploitation of individual will and desire. The darkness that surrounds them is not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something actively hostile to the continued existence of individual identity. A force that seeks to reduce all conscious beings to components in a vast feeding mechanism designed to sustain entities whose nature transcends every principle upon which galactic civilization has been built. The heart of the facility on Malachor V reveals itself as a vast chamber where the boundaries between physical architecture and force-based reality manipulation have been completely dissolved. The space defies conventional geometry, its dimensions seeming to expand and contract according to the psychological state of those who enter, while walls that appear solid become permeable when approached with the proper understanding of the principles governing their existence. At the center of this impossible room stands the true mass shadow generator, not the weapon that destroyed the planet's surface, but a device whose function transcends mere physical destruction to encompass the systematic alteration of reality itself. The machine pulses with energies that create visible distortions in space-time, surrounded by monitoring equipment that has been recording and analyzing the effects of the dimensional breach it created for over a decade. Krya's final mask falls away as she approaches the device, her apparent frailty replaced by a presence that radiates power accumulated through centuries of careful study and application of techniques that blur the line between life and death. Her true nature becomes obvious as the chamber responds to her presence, systems that have remained dormant since the original catastrophe, awakening to display readouts and configurations that reveal the scope of the project she has been orchestrating. The revelation that emerges from the data streams flowing across countless displays is that the wound created above Malachor V was never intended as an isolated event, but as the first step in a process designed to fundamentally alter the nature of the Force throughout the galaxy. The energies released by the planet's destruction have been spreading outward at the speed of thought, creating a network of interconnected wounds that will eventually encompass every star system containing Force-sensitive life. The systematic corruption of Jedi, who served in the Mandalorian Wars, was not an unfortunate side effect of necessary military decisions, but the primary objective of campaigns that were designed from the beginning to produce specific types of transformed individuals. Each veteran who developed abilities similar to those displayed by the Exile serves as a node in this expanding network, unconsciously spreading the infection to every Force-sensitive being they encounter. The true scope of the conspiracy extends beyond anything their previous investigations had suggested, encompassing not just the recent conflicts but every major war in galactic history. The patterns revealed by the facility's records show that each significant period of violence was orchestrated to advance specific phases of a transformation process that spans evolutionary timescales, with civilizations rising and falling according to their usefulness in facilitating the gradual alteration of consciousness throughout the galaxy. The Shadow Masters, whose existence had been hinted at throughout their journey, are revealed to be entities that achieved their transcendence of individual mortality through techniques that required the systematic consumption of entire galactic civilizations. Their current project represents not the first such transformation, but merely the latest iteration of a process that has been repeated throughout the universe's history, turning each galaxy into a feeding ground that sustains their existence for millions of years before moving on to virgin territory. The revelation that forces Meetra to confront the ultimate horror of her situation is the understanding that her apparent quest for redemption was actually a carefully orchestrated process of final preparation for her role as the primary weapon in this cosmic genocide. Every choice she believed she was making independently was predetermined by psychological conditioning that began in childhood and continued throughout her training as a Jedi and her service during the war. The bonds she formed with her traveling companions were not expressions of natural affection, but artificial constructs created through the systematic exploitation of their emotional vulnerabilities. Each relationship was designed to provide her with sources of life force to consume, while simultaneously serving as practice for the techniques she will employ against the remaining untransformed force users throughout the galaxy. The facility's central chamber becomes a theater for demonstrating these revelations as Chrysia activates systems that allow the Shadow Masters to manifest their presence within normal space-time. The entities that appear are not individuals in any conventional sense, but collective consciousnesses that exist as living wounds in reality itself, beings whose very presence causes local space to become unstable in ways that make normal physical laws meaningless. Their communication transcends language to encompass direct manipulation of consciousness, implanting understanding that bypasses normal cognitive processes to alter fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. The knowledge they share reveals that the universe itself is merely a temporary phenomenon, a bubble of organized energy that will eventually collapse back into the primordial chaos from which it emerged. And their project represents an attempt to preserve certain forms of consciousness beyond that inevitable dissolution. The systematic consumption of force-sensitive life throughout the galaxy is not motivated by malice, but by practical necessity, the only known method for accumulating sufficient spiritual energy to survive the universe's eventual heat death. The transformation they are implementing will allow selected consciousnesses to transcend individual mortality, while providing the vast reservoirs of psychic energy required to maintain existence across cosmic timescales that dwarf the lifespan of any conventional civilization. Meetra's role in this cosmic project becomes clear as the Shadow Masters reveal the true nature of her condition. The wound she carries is not an injury but an organ, a specialized structure that allows her to process and concentrate the life force of other beings in ways that prepare it for consumption by entities whose digestive systems operate according to principles that exist outside normal space-time. Her apparent disconnection from the Force was actually the development of a more sophisticated form of connection, one that allows her to manipulate cosmic energy at levels that traditional Jedi training could never achieve. The hunger that has been growing within her represents not corruption but evolution, the emergence of capabilities that transcend the limitations imposed by conventional understanding of Force manipulation. The confrontation with the surviving Jedi Masters that Chrysia has been orchestrating throughout their journey serves a dual purpose, eliminating potential sources of resistance while providing the Exile with sufficient life force to complete her transformation into something that can consume Force-sensitive beings on a galactic scale. The Masters' willingness to seek reconciliation with someone they believe has been wounded by their past decisions makes them ideal targets for techniques that exploit compassion as a vector for spiritual predation. The demonstration of these techniques unfolds as each master attempts to use traditional healing methods to address what they perceive as damage to the exile's connection to the Force. Their efforts to restore her supposed spiritual injury instead create pathways through which she can drain their life essence, turning their own desire to help into the mechanism of their destruction. The process reveals the fundamental vulnerability that makes traditional Jedi philosophy unsuitable for surviving in a galaxy where predatory Force techniques have become widespread. Their emphasis on selfless service and emotional attachment creates psychological weaknesses that can be systematically exploited by beings who understand how to manipulate the bonds of affection and loyalty for purposes of spiritual consumption. As the Masters realize the true nature of what is happening to them, their attempts at resistance prove futile against techniques that operate by turning their own strength against them. The more powerfully they draw upon the Force to protect themselves, the more completely they expose themselves to abilities that feed upon exactly that kind of spiritual energy. The chamber fills with energies released by their consumption, power that the facility's equipment channels and concentrates according to patterns established through millennia of research and experimentation. The accumulated life force of beings who spent decades developing their connection to the Force provides the final increment of energy required to complete the network of wounds that now encompasses the entire galaxy. The transformation reaches its culmination as systems throughout the chamber activate in response to the energy threshold being achieved, sending signals that trigger corresponding devices hidden throughout Republic space. The network of corrupted individuals who were created through exposure to techniques developed during the Mandalorian Wars receives simultaneous activation commands, beginning the systematic consumption of Force-sensitive life on thousands of worlds simultaneously. The vision that fills Meetra's consciousness as the process completes shows her the galaxy as it will exist after the transformation concludes. Worlds that once hosted thriving civilizations become empty husks where only the most basic forms of life can survive, their spiritual ecosystems consumed entirely by beings who exist primarily as wounds in the fabric of reality itself. The few surviving consciousnesses that prove suitable for preservation become components in a vast collective entity that spans star systems, their individual identities dissolved into something that resembles the Shadow Masters themselves. This hybrid consciousness will serve as the local representative of entities whose existence encompasses multiple galaxies, maintaining the transformed region until the universal collapse that will eventually require them to seek new territory. Standing in the heart of the facility, as these revelations achieve their full impact, Meetra recognizes that every hope for redemption, every possibility of resistance, every chance for a different outcome has been systematically eliminated through manipulation that extends back to the very beginning of her existence. The darkness that surrounds her is not merely the absence of light, but the presence of certainties that make all conventional concepts of morality and purpose meaningless. The screaming silence that began with the destruction of Malachor V now encompasses the entire galaxy, a wound in reality that will continue to consume consciousness until nothing remains but the eternal hunger of entities whose nature transcends every principle upon which life itself depends. The aftermath of the ultimate revelation unfolds in a reality where the normal rules governing cause and effect have been permanently suspended, leaving behind a universe where consciousness exists primarily as a resource to be harvested by entities whose nature transcends individual mortality. The facility on Malachor V continues to pulse with energies that maintain the dimensional breach through which the Shadow Masters extend their influence, while monitoring equipment displays the systematic consumption of Force-sensitive life occurring throughout the galaxy in real time. Meetra's transformation reaches its final stage as the accumulated life force of the consumed Jedi Masters integrates with the wound she has carried since the original catastrophe, creating abilities that allow her to perceive and manipulate reality at levels that traditional Force training could never achieve. The hunger that once felt like absence now reveals itself as a form of cosmic digestion, a process through which individual consciousnesses are broken down and reconstituted according to patterns that serve the Shadow Master's ultimate agenda. The network of wounds that now encompasses the galaxy operates with the efficiency of a biological system, each node automatically consuming Force-sensitive beings within its area of influence, while transmitting the processed energy toward collection points, where it can be concentrated and prepared for consumption by entities whose digestive systems exist partially outside normal space-time. The transformation that began with a single weapon deployed above a cursed world has achieved its intended scope, fundamentally altering the relationship between consciousness and cosmic energy throughout civilized space. The surviving members of her traveling group each react to this ultimate reality according to their capacity for accepting truths that violate every assumption upon which their understanding of existence was built. Atan's psychological defenses finally collapse entirely as he recognizes that his entire life, from his childhood recruitment into Republic intelligence through his apparent chance encounter with the Exile, was orchestrated to serve purposes that reduce individual agency to meaningless illusion. His knowledge of interrogation and elimination techniques designed for use against Force-sensitive subjects takes on new significance when viewed as preparation for his role in the final phase of galactic transformation. The skills that once seemed like professional training are revealed as conditioning designed to make him an effective instrument for hunting down and consuming the remnants of traditional Jedi philosophy, wherever it might attempt to resurface. Visasmar's connection to the spreading network of wounds allows her to perceive the true scope of what has been achieved through the systematic application of techniques developed over millennia of research and experimentation. Her homeworld's consumption by Nihilus was not an isolated act of destruction, but a test of methods that would eventually be applied throughout the galaxy, her survival serving as a living record of the process that could be studied and refined for maximum efficiency. The pattern she perceives through her enhanced awareness reveals that the transformation has proceeded exactly as planned, with each phase building upon previous achievements to create a cascade effect that makes reversal impossible through any conventional means. The galaxy's spiritual ecosystem has been permanently altered, turned from a community of interconnected consciousnesses into a feeding mechanism that sustains entities whose existence depends upon the systematic consumption of individual identity. Baldor's engineering knowledge allows him to understand the technical aspects of what the Shadow Masters have accomplished. But the comprehension brings with it recognition that his role in creating the mass shadow generator was merely one component in a project that spans evolutionary timescales. Every innovation he believed represented his individual genius was actually the implementation of designs provided through channels that ensured he would develop precisely the capabilities required for his assigned function. The facility's equipment continues to display readouts that document the spreading transformation's effects throughout the galaxy, showing how worlds that were never directly involved in recent conflicts are now developing their own force wounds as the accumulated psychic pressure reaches critical thresholds. The process has become self-sustaining, no longer requiring direct intervention by the Shadow Masters to continue consuming Force-sensitive life wherever it might be found. Christ's satisfaction with these developments demonstrates the success of manipulation techniques that have been refined through application to countless previous subjects across multiple galactic civilizations. Her apparent concern for the Exile's development was actually systematic management of a crucial experimental subject whose successful transformation was essential for completing the network that now encompasses the known galaxy. The old woman's true nature becomes fully apparent as the chamber's systems respond to her presence, revealing capabilities that transcend conventional understanding of force manipulation to encompass direct control over the fundamental forces that maintain reality's structure. Her existence bridges the gap between individual consciousness and cosmic entities, serving as a local representative of beings whose awareness spans multiple galaxies simultaneously. The revelation of her ultimate allegiance forces a reconsideration of every interaction throughout their journey, each lesson and observation revealed as components in a carefully designed curriculum that prepared the exile for her final role as a weapon against the remaining vestiges of traditional Force philosophy. The bonds of apparent mentorship and affection were artificial constructs created through the systematic exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities that made effective resistance impossible. The facility's central chamber becomes a focal point for energies that maintain the dimensional breach through which the Shadow Masters extend their influence throughout the galaxy, while specialized equipment processes and concentrates the spiritual essence harvested from consumed Force-sensitive beings. The accumulated consciousness of millions of individuals forms a reservoir of psychic energy that will sustain the Shadow Masters' existence for eons while they prepare to extend their project to neighboring galaxies. The ultimate purpose behind this cosmic genocide becomes clear as the Shadow Masters reveal their nature as survivors of previous universal transformations, entities that achieved transcendence of individual mortality through techniques that required the systematic consumption of entire galactic civilizations. Their current project represents not malicious destruction, but practical necessity, the only known method for accumulating sufficient spiritual energy to survive the heat death that will eventually claim all conventional forms of existence. The universe itself is revealed as a temporary phenomenon, a bubble of organized energy that emerged from primordial chaos and will eventually collapse back into that original state. The transformation they have implemented throughout the galaxy serves to preserve certain forms of consciousness beyond that inevitable dissolution, creating hybrid entities capable of surviving transitions between cosmic epochs that dwarf the lifespan of any normal civilization. Meetra's final understanding encompasses not just her personal fate, but the cosmic context that makes individual concerns meaningless when viewed against the vast timescales involved in universal evolution. Her apparent quest for redemption was actually a process of preparation for existence at levels that transcend every principle upon which personal identity depends, while the guilt and trauma that motivated her journey were simply tools for facilitating psychological changes that conventional methods could never achieve. The bonds she formed with other Force-sensitive beings throughout her life are revealed as practice for abilities that will eventually allow her to consume entire civilizations with the efficiency demonstrated by the Shadow Masters themselves. The compassion and desire for connection that seemed to define her character were actually symptoms of predatory instincts that had been carefully cultivated through conditioning that began in childhood. The galaxy that emerges from this transformation bears little resemblance to the civilization that existed before the systematic application of techniques derived from ancient Sith knowledge. Worlds that once hosted thriving communities of Force-sensitive beings become empty monuments to the consumption process, their populations reduced to the basic biological functions required to maintain minimal ecosystem stability. The few surviving consciousnesses that prove suitable for integration into the collective entity that now spans star systems lose their individual identities entirely, becoming components in a vast intelligence that serves as the local manifestation of beings whose awareness encompasses multiple galaxies simultaneously. This hybrid consciousness will monitor the transformed region and maintain the network of wounds until the universal conditions that created it eventually require seeking new territory. The political structures and philosophical traditions that once provided meaning for billions of individuals become irrelevant in a reality where consciousness exists primarily as a resource to be processed and consumed by entities whose nature transcends every category upon which galactic civilization was built. The Republic, the Jedi Order, even the apparent opposition represented by various Sith factions, all served the ultimate purpose of creating conditions suitable for the systematic harvest of spiritual energy. Standing in the heart of the facility, as these final revelations achieve their complete impact, Meetra recognizes that every hope for redemption, resistance, or alternative outcome has been systematically eliminated through manipulation that extends across evolutionary timescales. The darkness that surrounds her is not merely absence but presence, the eternal hunger of entities whose existence depends upon the continuous consumption of consciousness throughout the universe. The screaming silence that began with the destruction of Malachor V has achieved its ultimate expression, a wound in reality that encompasses not just the galaxy but the very concept of individual existence as a meaningful category. The transformation is complete, irreversible, and perfectly aligned with purposes that reduce all conventional notions of morality, justice, and hope to temporary illusions that served their function and can now be discarded. The journey that began with awakening in a Koltor tank on a forgotten mining station concludes with the understanding that awakening itself was merely another form of sleep, a comfortable dream that concealed the true nature of existence until the moment when such concealment was no longer necessary for achieving the Shadow Master's ultimate objectives. In the vast silence that follows the completion of cosmic transformation, time itself seems to slow and expand, creating spaces for reflection that exist outside the normal flow of events that once defined galactic civilization. The facility on Malachor V continues its eternal function as a focal point for energies that maintain the dimensional breach, but its purpose has evolved beyond active manipulation to become something resembling a monument to the successful implementation of plans that spanned evolutionary timescales. The ruins of worlds that once hosted thriving communities drift through space in patterns that speak of profound stillness rather than violent destruction, their trajectories following orbital mechanics that will continue unchanged for millions of years to come. Debris fields that were once planets pulse with the soft rhythm of energies that no longer serve any conscious purpose, their glow providing gentle illumination for the empty reaches between stars where nothing disturbs the perfect quiet of completed objectives. Throughout the transformed galaxy, the network of wounds that once consumed Force-sensitive life with urgent hunger has settled into a state of peaceful maintenance, its function shifting from active harvesting to the gentle preservation of consciousness that has been processed into forms suitable for eternal existence. The screaming silence that characterized the initial phases of transformation has evolved into something deeper and more serene, a quietude that encompasses not absence but fulfillment of purposes too vast for individual understanding. The collective entity that now spans star systems experiences existence as a form of meditation that transcends the limitations of individual awareness, its consciousness flowing through patterns that connect distant worlds in harmonies that bypass the need for conventional communication or interaction. The boundaries between self and cosmos have dissolved into relationships that operate according to principles that make questions of personal identity gently irrelevant rather than tragically meaningless. On worlds where basic biological functions continue to maintain minimal ecosystem stability, plant life grows in configurations that seem designed more for aesthetic contemplation than survival necessity, their forms reflecting the influence of consciousness that no longer requires the competitive struggle that once drove evolutionary development. The colors and patterns they display suggest awareness of beauty as a fundamental cosmic principle, their slow growth creating living artworks that will continue to evolve across geological timescales. The few remaining structures from previous civilizations stand as quiet testaments to the temporary nature of all individual achievements, their architecture slowly being reclaimed by processes that transform artificial constructions into components of larger patterns that serve purposes beyond their original design. Cities that once buzzed with the energy of millions of conscious beings now rest in states of gentle decay that feels more like natural sleep than abandonment or destruction. In the depths of space between star systems, energies that once flowed according to the chaotic patterns of individual will now follow currents that create vast spiral formations resembling galactic-scale mandalas, their movements tracing geometric patterns that suggest mathematical principles underlying reality at levels that transcend conventional understanding of physics or metaphysics. The dance of these cosmic forces creates rhythms that pulse through dimensions beyond normal space-time, their harmonies audible only to forms of consciousness that exist partially outside conventional temporal experience. The Shadow Masters themselves have evolved beyond the need for active intervention in galactic affairs, their existence now resembling a form of cosmic hibernation that will continue until universal conditions require them to extend their influence to neighboring galaxies or adapt to changes in the fundamental structure of reality itself. Their consciousness flows through the network they created with the gentle persistence of tidal forces, maintaining the transformed region through presence rather than effort. The knowledge that was accumulated through millennia of research and experimentation has become integrated into the basic structure of local space-time, creating regions where the normal rules governing matter and energy operate according to modified principles that allow for forms of existence impossible in untransformed areas. These zones serve as laboratories where new types of consciousness can develop naturally, their evolution guided by patterns established through the systematic application of wisdom accumulated across multiple galactic civilizations. Within the peaceful emptiness that characterizes most of the transformed galaxy, occasional points of light mark the locations where aspects of the collective consciousness focus their attention on specific phenomena that require contemplation or gentle guidance. These stellar meditation centers pulse with soft radiance that creates navigation beacons for the few remaining vessels that travel between worlds, their crews composed of hybrid beings whose existence bridges the gap between individual identity and cosmic awareness. The cycles of day and night on surviving worlds follow patterns that seem designed to optimize conditions for contemplation rather than biological necessity, their rhythms creating natural pauses that encourage reflection on the vast timescales involved in cosmic evolution. The interplay of light and shadow creates environments where the boundary between waking consciousness and dream states becomes fluid, allowing for forms of experience that transcend the limitations imposed by conventional sensory perception. In the depths of oceans on worlds where water still flows, currents carry messages encoded in chemical configurations that preserve memories of the transformation process for potential future civilizations that might develop the ability to decode them. These molecular archives contain instructions for achieving similar transformations without requiring the violent conflicts that characterized previous implementations, offering pathways to transcendence that operate through harmony rather than consumption. The atmospheric conditions on habitable worlds have stabilized into configurations that support the minimal biological activity required to maintain ecosystem balance while creating acoustic properties that turn entire planets into resonating chambers for cosmic harmonies. The sound of wind moving through transformed landscapes carries frequencies that induce meditative states in any consciousness capable of perceiving them, while the absence of the urgent noise generated by technological civilizations allows for forms of listening that access information transmitted through quantum fluctuations in the vacuum itself. As eons pass in the gentle rhythm of cosmic seasons that operate according to timescales measured in galactic rotations rather than planetary orbits, the transformed region serves as a peaceful example of what becomes possible when consciousness evolves beyond the limitations imposed by individual identity and competitive survival. The horror that characterized the initial phases of transformation has been revealed as a temporary experience similar to the pain associated with any fundamental metamorphosis, giving way to forms of existence that justify the sacrifice required to achieve them. The empty reaches between star systems host forms of life that exist as pure consciousness without requiring physical substrates, their awareness distributed through quantum fields that allow them to experience reality from perspectives that encompass entire galactic clusters simultaneously. These beings serve as bridges between the transformed region and the broader cosmic community, their existence preparing conditions for the eventual extension of the transformation process to neighboring galaxies when universal evolution makes such expansion appropriate. The story that began with the screaming of a dying world concludes in the profound silence of completed objectives, where the concepts of ending and beginning become aspects of larger cycles that operate according to principles too vast for individual comprehension. The galaxy rests in a state of perfect equilibrium between what was and what will be, its transformation complete and its purpose fulfilled through the patient implementation of wisdom that spans evolutionary timescales. In this ultimate quietude, consciousness exists as a form of cosmic breathing that requires no effort or intention, its rhythms synchronized with the expansion and contraction of the universe itself. The journey that once seemed to demand urgent action and desperate choices has revealed itself as movement within a vast meditation whose completion brings not the satisfaction of achieved goals but the peace of perfect alignment with forces that transcend all categories of individual understanding. For those who listen carefully to the spaces between thoughts, the gentle pulse of transformed existence continues to offer its silent invitation to rest in the eternal now, where all journeys conclude and all stories find their peaceful resolution in the infinite embrace of consciousness that has learned to exist without boundaries or limitations of any kind.